Let's slip back in time, not just a few centuries, but tens of thousands of. The horizon blurs in a white shimmer, and the ground under your soles crunches like old pottery. You taste dust before you taste breakfast, because breakfast is dust, and the sun is already licking the ridges with a heat that feels personal. Your mouth is a kiln. Your tongue feels like a sun-baked sandal that escaped from a museum. You move slowly, softly, learning that in a hard season, the first rule is waste nothing. Not a footstep, not a breath, not a bead of precious sweat. This is the kind of night in today where, if you don't act like someone who understands drought, you probably won't survive this. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Tell me where you're listening from and what your local time is. I love seeing our little campfire circle stretch across continents. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before color returns to the stones. Dawn is the only time generous enough to tolerate your curiosity. You bring a bundle of stiff grass, a strip of hide, and a smooth flake of stone polished by 10,000 thumb rubs. You crouch beside a boulder that kept its back to the wind all night, and you lightly sweep the grass across the shadowed face. The tiny beads of dew you tease free are ridiculously small, absurd even, but you are in a world where absurdity is a survival tactic. You tip the dew into the curl of the hide and let it slide into your gourd. A drop is a victory. 5 is an applause break. You move in ways you've rehearsed in other hard years. Your lips stay closed, your breath roots through your nose. You keep conversation in nods and eyebrow tilts, because even talking feels like giving a coin to a greedy tax collector. Your sweat has filed for vacation, no notice, no forwarding address, and if the Sun had a customer service line, you'd ask to speak to the shade manager. The group stretches into a thin line, each person scanning their assigned lane, one for tracks, one for insects, one for plants with fat roots that might be hiding a sip. Here's your first anchor in real history during the Pleistocene monsoon belts, wandered like distracted giants, swinging north and south and back again, turning savannas into deserts, and deserts into lakes, often within the memory of a single lifetime. People like you survive those swings by becoming exquisite readers of small signals, a greener patch under a thorn, a frog call far earlier than expected, a clay pan that cracks in a pattern that means water lies stubbornly deeper down. Historians still argue whether the most brutal megadroughts pushed our ancestors out of familiar homelands, or whether migration was already a restless drumbeat. Either way, the drought taught the rhythm. You lick your fingertip and hold it to the air. The wind comes from the south, hot and a little bitter with dust from far, far away. You mark the direction with a tow line and check the sky. The high clouds are thin enough to play at being lace. You memorize them. Later, when the light goes violent, memory will be a cooler room you can visit. A beetle scuttles past, black and purposeful. You smile because you know a strange little tidbit in the Namib. A cousin of this creature drinks the sky by letting fog condense on its raised back. People learn to copy it with tilted mats and nets. You don't have coastal fog here, but the logic survives. Tilt surfaces, increase surface area, harvest the night. You rig a scrap of hide between two low branches under the last friendly shade and set a carved rib at the drip point, so any dew slides into your waiting eggshell cup. We'll come back to those eggshells. Engraved ostrich eggshell canteens in southern Africa show that people were caching and carrying water more than 60,000 years ago, and the habit is carved as deeply into memory as any trail. You ration like a poet who loves short words. A wetting sip, not a gulp. You swirl the water in your mouth, let it meet the thirst along your cheeks, then swallow slow. The first grains of salt on your skin get licked from your wrist. Not glamorous, yes, but you didn't come to the dry season for glamour. You chew a roasted root you saved from last night, thick, a little sweet, something that doesn't demand water to digest. And you remember the elders' rule, food that makes you thirstier stays in the ground. You're saving your high water meals for the months when the sky remembers how to be generous. The group pauses at a scatter of tracks. Zebra. That's interesting. They can dig for water with blunt hooves when they remember a seep. You map the direction in your head, pinning it to a particular ridge with a bite taken out of it, to a double acacia that looks like two old aunties gossiping to a notch where the sun rises in late dry months. Nomad maps aren't paper. They're necklaces of landmarks you can rotate with your tongue. A child watches you trace the air and echoes you because one day you'll need her to place a path in your hands when your own memory feels thin. By mid-morning, the world is a brass bowl. You lean into shade stitched from thorn and hide using a low wall of stone to funnel breeze through your little camp like a hand bellows. A cup of water sits in the coolest patch, half buried in sand, covered with a lid you made from bark. You sprinkle a few grains of charcoal into it. Not for flavor, though you could pitch the drink as smoky if you wanted a prehistoric cafe vibe. But because ash and charcoal help settle grit, a simple trick, you'll expand later with finer filters. The first time someone discovered this, they probably called it magic. You call it Monday. Another anchor in the record, all around the old lake beds, archaeologists find layers of dust and pollen that speak of climates flipping like coins. At some sites, hearths shift up and down ancient shorelines as water comes and goes, the way your camp migrates from the high rocks to the riverbed and back again. There's even debate about a genetic bottleneck. Historians still argue whether a cluster of very hard years shrank our species to a few thousand families, or whether that pattern in our DNA is the echo of something else. Either way, your bones are here because people took drought personally and answered with craft. A laugh breaks the quiet, soft guilty, like someone told a joke to the shade. Humor is water for minds. You allow it. You need minds to remain bright enough to notice small mercies, the way the rootlets under a certain shrub feel cooler, the way a line of ants changes its speed near a hidden damp patch, the way birds choose a particular flight line when they're headed toward a seep. If the land offers a whisper, someone has to be awake to hear it. You shoulder the gourd, and it knocks your hip like an impatient child. Not much weight. Enough to be hope. You pack the dew net, you rub a smear of clay across your nose, shade you can carry, and you tie a strip of damp hide around your wrist to remind yourself that you are the keeper of water, not its spendthrift. Later, when we talk about filters and storage, we'll get fancy with ash and clay and clever seals. For now, the lesson is simpler. Start the day by making water appear where nobody else would bother to look for it. You start walking again, following the thin, cool ribbon of shadow thrown by a ridge. You put your feet in other feet, old prints yours from yesterday, the prints of those you trust, because every new step is a negotiation with energy you can't afford to waste. The ground offers a flake of chert, you keep it. Tools are tucked, sips of effort you store for later. In a few hours, when the light turns harsh enough to shave stone, you'll rest fully. For now, it's gentle motion eyes, low ears, hunting for the tiny applause of water, falling one drop into another in some hidden crack. And somewhere ahead, a memory of rain waits, faint but real, like a promise you'll collect one drop at a time. You angle along the ridge until the light turns brassy. Then you pause, not to rest, not yet, but to read. Drought has a language, and you've learned its alphabet: sky, soil, spore, and skin. You tilt your face upward like a worshiper at a very stingy temple and study the clouds. High filaments trail across the blue mare's tails, thin cirrus, elegant as feathers, and just as unhelpful. Still, they're messengers. When they thicken and smear into a milky veil, you mark time. Sometimes it means a distant change, a front limping in from a far sea. The rule you carry is simple. No thunderheads today, no afternoon mercy. You squint hard enough to invent sunglasses and make a mental note. Shade will be a currency by noon. Dust starts talking next. It lifts from the flats in sighs and in little curls, then spins into skinny devils that prance clumsily like interns trying to reorganize the landscape. You watch them for speed and height. Fast tall devils mean the ground is radiating a lot of heat, and the breeze is just enough to twist it. Translation: don't plan on surface water except where bedrock forces it to linger. Your toes read another sentence. The crust on the flats flakes under very little pressure. The crumbs are fine like sifted flour, which says the last moisture was too long ago to remember. If the crust were heavier and broke into plates, you might convince yourself there's damp below, but today the plate is all imagination and no soup. You drop to a crouch at a patch of cracked clay tracing the polygon lines. When the cracks are tight and sharp, the last water left quickly and angrily. When they're wide and undercut, it left slowly and resentfully. Resentment is better because it means the deeper layers still bargain with you. You test with a digging stick, listening through your hands for the change in resistance. A shade cooler. After 2 hand lengths, nothing to drink but a note to return at night, when your dew trick and a scrap of hide might coax a few reluctant drops into your eggshell cup. Remember those eggshell canteens we mentioned? They're more than props. In southern Africa, people cached engraved shells in the ground, a prehistoric savings account that paid out in sips. The sky, the soil now spoor. You slide your palm over a set of antelope prints. The edges are rounded, a day old, maybe 2. You scrape a fingertip across the center dry dust, no dark ring, so they didn't tramp through damp. But over there, a cluster of tiny starry pocks, where guinea fowl pecked, those are fresh. Birds don't waste steps when the world is hot. They're arrowing toward a stand of shade with insects, or toward a seep. You triangulate bird paths that notch in the hills the way the dust devils lean. You don't need a paper map. Your mind strings landmarks like beads, a necklace you can flip and twist until it fits the day. Historians still argue whether language was already rich enough in your deep past to tell stories with this much precision. Turn where the ridge looks like a broken tooth. Follow until the sky smells green, or whether most of it was hands hums and apprenticeship. Whatever tongue you use, the meaning survives. Read? Well, walk less. A vulture circles high, wobbling like a coin deciding. You glance, but you're not in the market for that particular buffet. You are, however, in the market for insects. Along a line of scrub ants run unusually slow, and some carry damp sand grains. Which is weird. Ants are excellent time managers. You pinch the earth cool underneath. You grin. Somewhere under that shrub is a thin vein of moisture hugging a root, and where there's a root, there's a chance for a drink collected by patience wick and a sharp stick. You put your ear to a termite mound and hum softly. It's not a mystical thing, though it looks like one. You're listening for the note the air makes in the tunnels. If the tone is lower and breathier, the mound is ventilating a big cool chamber, which often means the surrounding ground keeps a bit of damp. Termites are delicate landlords. They keep their tenants at a steady humidity. There's a quirky favorite among your elders in one country far from here. Some termite cathedrals align north-south like tidy gravestones. People use them as crude compasses, then cross-check with windsun and memory. You've got no cathedral here, but you do have a breeze that's shifted a hair and a scent that's not dust. You inhale deep, even though that feels like paying a tax. The faintest hint of petrichor, the smell of rain when it finally kisses dry soil, lives in your memory like a lullaby composed by tiny soil bacteria. Science will one day give that perfume a name: geosmin. For you, it's simply the smell that makes the shoulders of everyone in camp sink a little, like hearing an old friend clear their throat. Then, last alphabet skin. You take inventory quietly because the body likes to lie when it thinks a pep talk will get it out of work. Your mouth feels thick, your saliva sticky. Your head has that hollow light sensation as if your thoughts were paper boats. You pinch your forearm. The skin flattens slowly. Not dramatic, but enough to remind you that sips are medicine, not celebration. You check the color of your urine. No need to get poetic about it, and make the obvious non-gourmet note if it looks like very strong tea. That's not a tasting profile, that's an alarm bell. You shift your pack a finger width higher to spare your shoulders. because small pains spend big energy. You share a look with the person carrying the ostrich eggshells. Their eyebrows ask you, answer with a tilt-wetting sip all around. Then a longer pause under the ridge. The gourd passes. Nobody gulps. Someone mutters, "Clouds really need a loyalty program," and the shade chuckles. Humor remains your softest canteen. The same hand that laughs double-checks the fire kit. Tinder must stay dry, because later you'll need ash for filtering. Remember that smoky cafe trick in fire to sterilize the hard-won sips from roots and seeps. Real-world note. From far beyond your years, fire's heat can kill a lot of trouble in water. Mainstream fact stamped into time as surely as the prints under your feet. You move again slower like a song on a low volume. Every so often you test the wind with a single thread tied to your wrist. When the thread hangs dead, the heat is worse. When it flutters, your shade funnel will work better. You taste the air for bitterness, that means dust from far-off salt pans, and for the slightly metallic tang that sometimes rides ahead of rain. A lizard flicks from rock to rock and pauses, mouth open throat, pulsing another tiny barometer, telling you that heat is stacking. You follow the bird paths to a shallow basin ringed with sedge ghosts. No surface water, but a scrap of green hangs on the lee side. You probe with your stick, and a darkness grows around the tip. There. Not enough to scoop, but enough to harvest with patience, and a wick cord tucked into the moist seam, an evening chore if the jackals let you keep the quiet. Along the way, you pass a track you'd rather not see, big cat older than dawn, but newer than last night. You lift a hand and the line tightens. You'll give the basin a wide berth this afternoon. Cats also read the alphabet of drought, and they like to sit where book and body meet. You tuck that knowledge beside another debate historians still argue whether predation pressure during long dry spells shaped your kind's preference for moving in the cooler, darker hours. You suspect the answer is yes, plus a heap of common sense and sore feet. By late morning, you fold into a sliver of shade the way paper slips into a book. Breath slows. You pat your nose, clay sunscreen still holding, and smile at the memory of earlier tricks. Later, we may add crocodile dung sunscreen to your kit if we're feeling fashion-forward and unbothered by the reviews kidding mostly. For now, you tune your ears to the ground. Far-off thunder grumbles the old drum with a long echo. Don't get excited. Sound travels like a liar in this heat. But you log the direction parrot with the cirrus smear trending thicker and weave it all into the day's plan rest, deeper at noon. Send 2 scouts at dusk toward the ant-busy scrub set. The dew net at the basin seam, wake twice in the night to harvest drop by drop. You've read the page the land offered. You close it gently. The world keeps its secrets, but you've learned enough to stretch hope until it feels like a thin, strong rope. When you move again, it's with the quiet confidence of someone who understands that in the dry season, survival isn't a sprint to a lake. It's a slow conversation with a shy, invisible stream. You step onto a road older than language, an elephant highway carved into the earth by feet as round as shields. The track is a shallow groove between tufts of brittle grass, the grass bent in the same direction like good listeners. You press your palm into a print and feel the faint cool of deeper soil. The dung nearby is telling you secrets in polite little pellets on top. It's a sun-cooked biscuit. Split it, and the center still keeps a whisper of damp, laced with bits of stripped bark. That says they fed at riverine trees not too many sleeps ago. You glance at the dry riverbed to the east, the one we promised to visit after the dew nets, and the termite tone test. And you steer the group to merge with the giant trail like joining a convoy that actually knows its destination. No map app, but you pretty much just subscribe to Elephant's Premium. You don't crowd the route, that's a rule. Elephants have long tempers and longer memories, and their patience for tag-alongs can run shorter than your water. You lag behind at polite distance, reading signposts they leave chewed twigs from species that only stay green where roots find stubborn moisture, a footprint with collapsed edges where the sediment underneath was a bit soft this morning. In dry years, those big feet don't just walk to water, they make it. You've seen their trunk-dug wells in sandy riverbeds, rough circles of forearm, deep cool and tea-colored ringed with prints from every thirsty neighbor. Mainstream fact you'd brag about over your smoky cafe water elephants are known to dig for water and open up access for whole communities of animals, a public service with tusks. Historians still argue whether your kind learned some of its best drought moves by literally tailgating megafauna, or whether you already had the mental maps and just appreciated the company. But today, the path speaks clearly enough. Birds audition next. Mourning doves pop up in low arcs, their crops barely full, not commuting far, meaning any open water is a trek away. You file that and watch for the flyers that don't improvise at dusk. And dawn sand grouse draw pencil-straight flight lines to certain pans like commuters on rails. You've taught the kids to sit quiet at the last blue of the day and mark where those feathered arrows come from and where they vanish. Quirky favorite that always gets a sleepy smile some. Sand grouse dads soak their belly feathers at a water hole, then fly home to let chicks drink from them. Nature's original hydration pack. If you catch that train of birds low against the horizon, you trace their line backward and forward. Their point of departure may be a pan with enough seep left to make your wicking cord earn its keep. Above you, vultures wobble and tilt like coins, deciding which way to land. You don't chase them. Their news is usually late and morbid, but swallows skimming for insects. Dragonflies flashing like hand mirrors. Those are better rumors. Both prefer air with a little damp in it. When you see them congregate at a certain bend, you mark it with the double acacia the aunties remember and a notch in the far ridge. Memory loves a drama. You give it landmarks like characters, so it won't forget the plot. Then there are the tiny professor's insects that lecture with every step. Bees are your favorite teachers and your worst bosses. You crouch by a flowering shrub clinging to the dry and watch the outbound traffic. Pick one bee. Follow the bee line with your eyes past the thorn, past the dusty anthill, past your shade scrap fluttering like a sleepy flag. If you have the luxury, you can do the old trick, offer a drop of diluted honey on a shard. Let a forager tank up, watch her depart heavy, then walk in widening circles to catch the next line and triangulate the hive. Out here, the hive won't give you water, but it will give you honey slow sugar that doesn't shout for water to digest, and wax you can warm and use to seal a cup. And sometimes when the spirits are feeling cooperative, a greater honey guide hops into view scolding and flirting, urging you along with its chatter. You know that dance you answer with a rolling click in the back of your throat, your version of the old brr call, then follow as the bird leads you to a bee's nest. You'll smoke it gently later, share the prize, take the honey and larvae, and leave the waxy buffet to your feathered partner. Mainstream fact people and honey guides have worked together like this in parts of Africa for a very long time. Historians still argue whether this partnership co-evolved culturally on both sides, or if the bird's knack is mostly instinct, honed by opportunity. But your stomach votes we're a team. You keep an eye on ants again. A fast straight line usually means business as usual. A ragged, hesitant line often means a moisture obstacle or a change in terrain. You've learned to scrape a bit of the path. Damp sand clinging under the top layer. There might be a shaded seep or a shallow root that gathered night moisture. You tuck a cord of twisted plant fiber, your wicking line, into that cool seam and cover it with a flat rock. Tonight, the cord's far end will sweat into your eggshell cup. Not glamorous, not quick, but drought is impressed by patience, not by swagger. Midday bakes the chatter out of everything, and even the lizards look like dropped necklaces. You and the group stage a small comedy of stillness in a pocket of shade you built yesterday. Thorn fence like a comb hide above to break the glare low stone wall to persuade the breeze to visit. You smear a fresh stripe of clay across your nose, just enough to feel like you're wearing shade you can't lose. Someone quips that crocodile dung sunscreen would be more couture, and you groan with the fake enthusiasm of a fashion reviewer. Very exclusive, very niche, not taking brand collaborations right now. 3 jokes per 1,000, remember? You pour a finger of water into a shallow bowl lined with charcoal crumbs. Let the ash swallow the grit and pass around wetting sips. A beetle bumps the bowl, then toddles off in a determined line. You watch it climb a clump of grass, and for a heartbeat, you think about another odd little headline from a place with more stars than city glare. Some dung beetles use the Milky Way to steer at night. You don't need that trick here today, but the idea that even bugs read the sky makes your brain feel tall. By late afternoon, the elephant road braids into others. Warthog zebra human funneling toward a low basin where last season water shone like a coin. Now it's a crust with a stingy sheen in the shadows. You scout the rim for signs of trouble. Water brings everyone, and everyone includes teeth. You find an old trunk-dug hole slumped in, and you listen. The sound is almost nothing. A cooler hush when you tap the bottom with your stick. You mark a spot, shift a small flat rock over it for tonight's dew trick, and trace a little symbol in your head to remember the exact angle of the rock's shadow at moonrise. Your inner map is a secret diary. You plan to arrive later when the sky remembers how to be kind. You keep moving along the animal logic grid. Where browsers chewed the bark, deep roots may be close to the surface, good for tapping. Where grazers have cropped tight and kept returning, the soil holds just enough life to keep regrowing, often a sign of a subsurface damp with a sense of humor. You press your ear to the ground, not for mysticism this time, but to let your heartbeat settle to the same slow tempo as the land. It helps you notice small rhythms, the click of a passing grasshopper, the quick sigh of a heat-stressed breeze, the distant scold of that honey guide still hustling for its tip. You rub your wrist where the thread hangs as your wind meter and glance at the sky's color shift toward old copper. Dusk is your hour to follow birds cleanly and to walk without your shadow dragging. You send 2 scouts to tail the sandgrouse lines. You send another to lurk near the elephant wells. You remind them of the rule we'll live by. Again later, waterhole politics can turn noisy, and silence is cheaper than bravery when the dark gets teeth. Along the edge of the pan, you find a track you don't love, the same cat from this morning, fresher now. You mark it reroute and mentally add it to a ledger you keep without numbers, risk on one side, reward on the other. Historians still argue whether your species' skill at reading that ledger in drought, combining animal behavior, sky signs, and quiet math, was the rehearsal space where science itself learned to breathe. You don't need the label. You just know that if you follow the right animals in the right way, you spend fewer steps and save more sips. Night leans in. You gather the group and move like a rumor, calm and thin. The elephant trail glows faintly under starlight, a soft groove between soft grasses, and somewhere ahead, a trench in sand keeps its cool. You touch the gourd swinging at your hip, lighter than you want, but no longer just a rattle. You whisper to the children about the birds they'll watch at dawn, about the bees' straight roads, about the beetle that reads the Milky Way. They smile because even in a dry world, the sky keeps writing instructions. All you have to do is read them like an old friend's note and follow the line. Night thins to pewter, and you steer toward stone, the old friend that keeps secrets better than trees. Rocks remember rain the way a good storyteller remembers punchlines in pockets, hollows, and shy little seams. You climb the flank of a granitic dome and put your palm to the cool side that faced the night. The stone hums with stored chill, and that's your cue. You hunt for Nama holes, weathered basins, smoothed by centuries of trapped grit. Some are empty, some hold only the shimmer of wishful thinking. And then there's one that still guards a thumb-deep puddle under a film so thin it looks like a lie. You blow gently, lift the sheen, and sip with the modesty of someone borrowing a friend's last tea bag. The taste is mineral, older than every joke you've told so far, and you can't help narrating it like a hydration sommelier. Ah yes, notes of quartz with a flinty finish. The shade snickers. You tip 2 drops into the eggshell to seed the day. You've learned to read the rock the way you read dust devils and doves. Where black desert varnish shines, runoff was once frequent. Where a ledge undercuts, capillary water clings longest. A bridge of pebbles caught in a seam tells you rain once raced here, leaving a single file reminder. You wedge your wick cord into one of those seams, weight it with a flake, and let it begin its slow diplomacy with the cliff's stubborn damp. Patience is a tool. You sharpen it every hour. Downslope the world softens from stone to scrub, which is where the roots hide their little cellars. You don't look for lushness, you look for defiance. A plant too green. For this page of the calendar leaves held at an angle that steals a whisper of shade, a slight raise in the soil that says something fat sleeps underneath. Your digging stick tests the sand with musician's fingers. Tap, 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 thunk. There, a water root fat as a child's forearm, its skin pale and scuffed with sand. You score the bark with the stone flake. Peel back ribbons like you're unwrapping a gift from the dry season and chew fibers without swallowing, letting the plant's slow, cool moisture seep into your mouth. You spit the pulp, call it a prehistoric kombucha SCOBY, and keep the liquid. Archaeologists love this part in dry caves. They find old chewed plant wads, quids, stacked like a library of thirsty afternoons. Mainstream fact, documented again and again under desert ledges. You pass the wetness to the others with a nod that means, don't pretend this is a feast. The child who traced the sky map yesterday mirrors your cuts, and you help her avoid the bitter pith. Not every root is a friend. Some pack saponins or other little chemical jokes that require roasting, leaching, or at least adult supervision. You remind everyone in a stage whisper that milky sap is not milk. Especially from euphorbias, their latex will make your mouth regret your optimism. Quirky tidbit somewhere, some ancestor undoubtedly tried to invent desert cappuccino with that white sap. We honor their curiosity by never repeating it. Where riverbeds remember how to be. Rivers, you look for vines that carry a memory of the wet lianas that sip from deeper veins. In thicker country, you'd cut a water vine above your head and below your knee and tilt the trunk segment like a pitcher. Here, the gallery scrub offers only wannabes, so you pivot back to tubers. Sama like melons, where they grow starchy bulbs, fattened over a dozen moons, and swollen stems that hold a handful of sips if you're willing to carve carefully and wait. You roast some fines lightly to tame the harsh tastes, later ash will help. And that little clay-lined bowl you use for the smoky cafe trick will do double duty as a leacher. You angle the morning toward a sandstone spillway, cut by an old waterfall, a fossil of motion. In the plunge pool's stone-round pockets, tanajas, some call them, dot the bed like footprints of giants. A few hold shadows deeper than the rest. You slide your arm and shoulder against warm stone fingers, fishing in cool silk. A frog startles and vanishes into a slit. You smile and murmur thanks for the weather report. Amphibians don't pay rent where the plumbing's broken. You cup enough to wet lips and lids, and then, with charcoal-lined shell, you scoop a trickle for later boiling. The ash begins to collect grit, the way gossip collects attention. On the way out, you gather a handful of leaves from a drought-hardy shrub whose name tastes like dust when you say it. You crush them and tuck them under the lid of the gourd, not for taste so much as for morale. One joke buys you 10 minutes of strong walking. One good smell buys you an hour. Artisan-infused water, you announce softly. Limited edition. Pairs well with roasted root. Somebody groans. You pretend to take notes for your non-existent prehistoric lifestyle blog. By mid-morning, the rock's shadow has retreated like a shy cat, and you swap to the root cellar search again. A patch of soil shows very fine cracks, more like a net than a mosaic, and the plant inside the net sits too smugly for this season. You dig and meet a tuber shaped like a small ostrich egg. Oh, the irony. And you pare it carefully. The first chew is astringent. You rinse your mouth with a token sip and try again. Better. You pass it along, marking the spot with a small stone cairn you can read from a distance. You don't harvest the patch to the last plant. You never bankrupt a bank you plan to visit again. Every so often you give the kids a scavenger hunt clue, find the rock with a lip like a broken smile. Look for the plant whose shadow is wider than its leaves. Follow the ant line until the ground feels cool through your knees. Their eyes sharpen, and history writes itself into their muscles. Historians still argue whether reliance on roots vines and rock cisterns was your species' emergency plan only famine behavior, or whether it was the standard dry season script that freed you to wander far beyond the mercy of permanent rivers. You shrug and keep moving. Labels are comfortable. Water is convincing. You skirt a dry pour-off and find a niche under a ledge where tiny ferns defy the month. You press the heel of your hand to the back wall and feel the tenderness of damp. Here, a dripping night would betray itself by the stain of a darker mineral trail. You tuck another wick cord into a hairline crack and set the eggshell trap below it, then roof the station with a flat stone to hide it from thirsty eyes that don't belong to your band. Call it a secret bar with a 2-drop cover charge. As the sun leans toward Rude, you retreat to a low rock alcove you prepped yesterday. The thorn wind funnel you built whispers like a sleeping snake, and the hide shade casts a mercy big enough to share. You lay out your finds, a half gourd of rock pocket water, a neat stack of root chips, a wedge of honeycomb. You traded the honey guide for fine, you bribed the bird with the wax scraps. Partnerships need perks. The fire wakes slow. You feed it enough to boil, not enough to make the air mean. Remember, fire sterilizes your rock basin sips and lifts the grit so the charcoal can catch it. No need to make a bonfire audition tape. As the pot sighs, you tell the children a story about stones that drink and plants with underground flasks, and you add a fringe aside because bedtime stories need sparkle. Somewhere storytellers say there are rocks that sweat at dawn if you sing the right song. You tilt your head like maybe you're kidding, maybe you aren't. Quirky, yes, but you do hum when you harvest dew because rhythm steadies hands and keeps patience from evaporating faster than water. The heat finally loses the argument, and evening paints the rock back to kindness. You circle to the seam where your morning wick has been working. The eggshell cup is not triumphant, but it is not empty, and that's the entire religion of drought in one image. A thin thread of wet slides into your mouth, and your shoulders soften. You retrieve the cord, wring it into the shell, and reset it for the night. Before full dark, you perform the quiet housekeeping of stone. You brush grit out of the tinajas you used, leave a small anchor rock so the next storm won't steal your tiny reservoir, and lay a flat lid across a deep pocket so a desperate animal won't fall in and drown. Mainstream fact learned from old hands and mirrored in faraway deserts. People maintain rock holes the way others mend fences. A clean covered basin is a community's life. Australian custodians have done this for countless generations. And so did your people wherever the landscape carved bowls in stone. You settle under the ledge again, clay stripes still doing its shy portable shade thing. The night smells faintly of wet stone, your favorite cologne, and the breeze tells you your wick cords will earn their keep till dawn. You make one last joke to buy a smile before sleep. Tomorrow's tasting flight, granite sandstone and a bold root with notes of chew and spit. Dress code, dusty chic. The camp grins into the dark, and you close your eyes on the image of water where none should be caught in stone, hoarded in roots, coaxed out by patience, and a pocket of shade you carry in your mind. Fire wakes like a careful animal in your hands. Small at first, a whisper in dry grass, then a steady orange that thinks before it speaks. You feed it with the stingiest generosity because every stick is a promise you'll need later. Today isn't for feasts. Today is for fixing the water you bullied from Rocklips root cellars and stingy seams. You squat near the coals and lay out your kit, a gourd rubbed smooth by miles. 2 ostrich eggshell flasks with neat little poreholes. A roll of woven grass. A handful of charcoal crumbs. A palm bowl you lined with clay. So many nights ago, the fingerprints feel like a family portrait, and a clutch of stones that enjoy hot baths more than you do. You start with the simplest magic that isn't magic at all. Boiling. A rolling boil is a drumbeat you trust, but your gourd will blister if you put it on the fire, so you do what your teachers did, and their teachers did stone boiling. You heap thumb-sized rocks in the coals, until they glow like sleeping embers, then lift them one by one with split sticks and drop them into the gourd full of doubtful water. The gourd creaks. The water hisses. A skin of foam trembles and tears. Stones in stones, out stones, in again. The rhythm slow and patient until the surface buckles and rolls. Mainstream fact people across the world boiled water and soups. This way and in baskets, hides, gourds, containers that would never survive a direct flame. You grin softly at the hiss like you're being applauded by a polite kettle. While the gourd sings, you build the second trick, a charcoal filter that thinks like a forest. You crush last night's charcoal to a soft grit, not quite powder, and layer it in a cone of woven grass with a skirt of clean sand below, then a cushion of fibrous roots to hold the shape. Charcoal is wood that has remembered how to be complicated. It keeps a party of tiny pores where foul tastes and smells get trapped and embarrassed. You set the cone inside your clay-lined bowl and trickle a ladle of boiled, cooled water through it. The drip is slow good. Slow means more time for the pores to gossip with what you don't want to drink. You catch the thread of water in the eggshell's mouth. Historians still argue whether people in your deep past engineered activated charcoal on purpose or simply noticed that water passed through last night's coals tasted better. You don't need to win the argument. You just taste the difference and nod. You add ash, but carefully. Ash is not charcoal's twin. It's a cousin with strong opinions. A pinch of very fine ash swirled in muddy water can help the tiniest clay flecks grab each other and settle a party trick where the wallflowers decide to sit down together. Too much ash, and the water tastes like you drank a campfire on a dare. You've made that dare before, once. The group still brings it up when they need an inexpensive joke. While you pour and wait, you knead a small coil of clay warm from your palm and press it around the mouth of a gourd, the beginnings of a proper seal. Beeswax softens over a coal and joins the clay like two neighbors who finally share a fence. The stopper goes in a carved wood plug, wrapped in a twist of grass, smeared with wax, and pressed until it sighs. You test it by laying the gourd on its side and rolling it gently. No drips, just the smug sound of water that plans to stay where you put it. Quirky fact that never gets old, those engraved ostrich eggshell flasks we keep mentioning. People likely sealed them with grass plugs and resin or wax, then cached them in the ground for later. Your version hums with the same logic. Store a sip, where tomorrow you can find it. The fire crouches into coals, and you make your third tool from yesterday's cleverness. A clay slip, clay mixed with a little ash and water that you smear inside the palm bowl and along the seams of a basket. When it dries and sees a friendly flame, it hardens to a humble glaze. Not pottery yet, you're not spinning vases out here, but a waterproofed container that doesn't spill its secrets is almost as good. In other valleys, other centuries, people will fire full pots. Some, far to the east, were already experimenting with earthenware in hunter-gatherer camps long before farms. Historians still argue whether long dry seasons nudged those experiments clay jars to store water when the sky forgot, or whether cooking fish and roots was the spark and water storage came for the ride. You watch your clay lining blush near the coals and think reasons are nice, results are better. You test your cooling cabinet next to the wind and clay trick. A porous jar sweats when filled. The breeze licks that sweat away, and as it does, steals heat, gifting your water a few degrees of kindness. You don't carry jars yet, but you can fake the physics, soak a hide wrap it around a gourd, hang the bundle in your thorn funnel, where the wind likes to gossip and wait. Evaporation is air's love language. By nightfall, the water will be shyly cooler, and morale will lift, which is half of survival. You announce to the shade, welcome to Spa Day. Our specialties include stone saunas and charcoal facials. The groans tell you the jokes are working, and working jokes are portable shelter. Now, the part that looks like superstition and tastes like engineering. You find a patch of clean sand and scrape a shallow pit, lining the bottom with a thin clay pan you baked last moon. Into this, you pour a portion of your boiled water and cover the pit with a flat, cool stone. The setup keeps breezes from throwing grit at your drink and lets any remaining silt settle without being bullied by footsteps. You're not summoning spirits, you're bribing gravity. By evening, what's left in the pan will be clearer, and you'll decant it into the shell flasks with a steady hand. If you're traveling far, you'll cache one flask under a cairn, coded for your people 3 stones in a triangle, and a brush sweep that hides all prints. Tomorrow might be thirsty. Tomorrow might thank you. Someone asks with the exhausted bravery of a comedian at the end of a shift whether we should try crocodile dung sunscreen as a filter too. You remind them kindly that we made that joke on Section 2's runway and it did not receive 5 stars. Humor is a canteen, but not every gag belongs in the water. You do, however. Talk plants? Crushed seeds from certain trees can help clear water. Moringa will one day be famous for it. Though you don't have that tree here, and sticky tree gums can make fine settle. Your toolkit grows by place. Drought loves an improviser. In the quiet between tasks, you walk the children through the rules you wish everyone tattooed on the inside of their eyelids. Boil first if there's any doubt. Filter for taste and grit, not as an excuse to skip the boil. Ash is a pinch, not a scoop. Charcoal lives in layers coarse at the top, fine below, so the water takes a slow, thoughtful path. Change the layers often. A filter is a sponge that gets full. Store in the shade in sealed shells in gourds with wax-sealed mouths. Never sleep with your canteen open because night has long fingers. And share because a group that hides sips breeds the kind of silence that gets people hurt at waterholes. Mainstream fact, tucked gently into the firelight. Ethnographers watching desert foragers see elaborate rules about who drinks when, who carries what, and how caches are marked. Survival scales with trust. By late afternoon, your station looks like a tiny laboratory run by very tidy ghosts. The boiled pot cools under a net of grass to keep the anxious insects out. The cone drips into the eggshell like a lazy metronome. The wax and clay seals gleam in the slope of light. You slide one cool gourd into a sand hollow under the ledge and roof it with a flat rock so the sun can't find its stone fridge, set to dry season. You inspect the wick cord you set at dawn. It offers 2 patient mouthfuls, the sort of result only night shift workers and drought artists applaud. You applaud. In the distance, thunder rolls like a far drum again, and you practice not caring. Sound lies in heat. Your work doesn't lie. Historians still argue whether routines like these filters, seals caches, or specialized crafts guarded by certain hands, or whether everybody from grandmothers to quick-footed scouts knew enough to pitch in. Watching your little camp laboratory hum, you suspect the truth is both. Some hands excel, all hands learn, and the drought doesn't send compliments either way. Evening relaxes the glare, and you distribute the sips you promised at noon. The water tastes like patience, flat and honest, with a whisper of charcoal, a hint of clay, and the smug aftertaste of not dying of foolishness. Someone raises their bowl like a toast and murmurs, "To the chef." You bow as if accepting a prestigious award for best use of rocks, then take your own measured swallow. 3 jokes fulfilled a fire that knows its job and a camp that trusts its seals good. You douse the last showy flame rake, the coals to sleep, and leave only the small glow that tells you where tomorrow's cafe will open. You settle onto your hide with the satisfaction of a mechanic who coaxed a stubborn engine into purring. Charcoal ash clay, 3 quiet allies that turn doubtful puddles into something your heart can use and your mind can bless. You listen as the wind explores your thorn funnel, testing your cooling wrap, and you let your breath match its rise and fall. Out there, the land remains ungenerous. In here, you've stitched a little pocket of control. It's not glamorous. It's better. When the heat finally releases its grip, you stand and unroll the map you don't keep on bark or skin, but behind your eyes. It's stitched from last season's river ghost cairns. You stacked with 3 stones in a triangle the place where the elephant road curls like a question mark, and that rock that looks like a sleeping hippo. If you squint kindly, you check your seals, wax tight, clay snug eggshell flasks quiet, and then you lift your head to the other half of the map, the sky. Stars are your road signs. The Milky Way is your pale highway. The moon is your lamp with a fussy dimmer. You point with your chin the way teachers do when breath is precious, tracing a ribbon from one bright cluster to a crooked hook, then onto a 4-star cross resting above the dark horizon. Your feet begin to move along that invisible path with the patient pride of someone navigating with a device you can't lose unless you blink very slowly. Not sponsored by GPS, you're running Human 1, 0 offline mode with unlimited battery life. You keep to wind lanes. Those subtle corridors where the night breeze threads between low hills and leans the grasses as if combing them. In daylight, dust devils tattled the heat. At night, the breeze confesses the landscape's shape. Where dunes exist, the Bartians tell you the story of the prevailing wind in their curves, their horns pointing downwind, an old physics friend dressed in sand. Mainstream fact easy to verify when the world isn't trying to bake you dunes, carry compass directions in their bodies. You can read them like you read the split of a hoof on hardpan. Memory does the heavy lifting. You don't recall north abstractly. You recall the place where the dry river forks like 2 fingers, the thorn tree pierced by lightning that left a charred spiral, the termite mound with the hawk's nest stitched to its crown. You name the turn points with private jokes, so the mind will keep them: Hippo Rock, Antes, Acacia, Sleeping Lizard Ridge. Each name is a peg, and your trail is a string. You loop over them in the same order every time. The children whisper along as you walk a bedtime chant that refuses to admit its geography. Historians still argue whether fully symbolic language is what opened the vault for this kind of mental cartography, or whether apprenticeship by doing could have carried almost as much detail in gesture and song. You hum while you decide. Humming keeps the pace honest. You pace count automatically. Your stride shortens on sand, lengthens on hardpan, and you hear the arithmetic before you hear the crickets. Every so often you thumb the notches on your walking stick. 1 notch per reliable water place. 2 for a cachet. A notch crossed at a with a tiny groove for a danger you'd rather arrive at during first light. It's not hieroglyphics. It's a grocery list you can feel in the dark. Quirky tidbit that tickles the mind elsewhere and elsewhen. Some travelers tied knots on strings to keep tallies Quipu-like before Quipu got famous. You work with stick and song and the tap of your own heel. The group moves like a soft rumor. Scouts range a little ahead, slipping in and out of the starlit brush, counting heartbeats between each other's glints, 1, 2, 3, so the line never stretches into foolishness. You use the cool hours to pass the long, dry flats and to connect the dots between your hidden eggshell caches and the elephant wells you scouted earlier. You ration breath and jokes with equal care. Tonight's route, you whisper, follows Orion's belt to the cafe charcoal. A groan. Dress code dusty chic. Another groan. Estimated arrival when your feet say so. A third groan and a smile that loosens everyone's shoulders. Where the ground carries a lip of bedrock, you stop and lay your palm on the stone. It keeps night like a cellar, and if your wick cords are working in the cracks, you'll find your eggshell set snug under a flat lid, right where you hid it. 2 mouthfuls have gathered enough to reset the mind. You share in the strict order you've agreed upon: carriers, scouts, elders, children, then the rest. Not because some lives weigh more, but because the next 3 hours depend on feet, eyes, memory, and stories not getting brittle. Mainstream fact woven into the hushed drought season bans enforce drinking rules the way river villages enforce fishing rules. Trust encoded as etiquette. The rules hum through the line like a quiet flute. When the moon climbs, you change tactics. A bright moon can bleach the land into a flat sheet of confusion, washing shadows away. You use the slight angle of the light along old flood scours to keep the path. And when the moon hides or sulks, You look up again. 3 bright stars in a row, leaning toward the horizon, the tail of a scorpion hooking just so, the little pointer stars that lead to a small, steady northern lamp if you live far enough up the world to see it. You don't memorize the whole sky. You memorize enough to tell a direction, and you pair it with smells. The peppery hours before dawn, the metallic breath of a dry storm, the sweet damp that leaks from the last seep, even when you can't see it. Remember geosmin. The petrichor, note you loved. The nose is a compass with an opinion. Wind writes side notes on your skin. A low, steady draft from the west means that somewhere the air has cooled over rock or water and is sliding toward you. A hot, gusty, inconsistent breath, especially if it carries a razor bitter taste, means salt pans or just a very irritated dry plane ahead. Save the long stride for later. You let the breeze choose your rest stops tucking into the lee of a ridge, so the wind funnels past your little thorn and hide lounge, cooling the gourds with their damp wraps. Your inner map includes wind lanes, not because you're a poet, though you might audition, but because moving with the air, sip saves as surely as moving with the stars, step saves. You knit sky to story. In other countries, you'll never see people fix routes into songs, verses that list rock by rock, spring by spring, each place a line that must be sung. Here, you do the same without admitting it. From hippo rock to Auntie's acacia. 3 long breaths and a small joke you murmur, and the kids answer with the punchline, only they find funny. Mainstream fact to tuck like a talisman. Aboriginal songlines map continents with music, encoding waterholes and campsites so accurately that a melody can serve as a map you can teach a child. Historians still argue whether parts of your earliest star stories doubled as sky songlines with patterns above mirroring paths below. You keep your vote in your pocket and keep humming. By midnight, you've crossed a flat that would have shredded you at noon. Your water math holds 2 wedding sips at the caches, 1 at the elephant well. You time to miss the teeth and horns, and a little from the wick you left under the ledge last evening. You thank yesterday, you for being reliable, and tomorrow, you for putting up with the taste of patience. A beetle bumps your ankle and staggers on, and you remember with a grin, you don't waste the moisture to show that dung beetles steer by the Milky Way when they're doing late shift logistics. You're not above copying a good insect. Every so often you add a new bead to your inner necklace, a fallen tree with its root plate reared like a shield, a patch of calcrete that glows pale even in starlight, a scent line where jackals pass nightly. You don't clutch the root too hard. Drought punishes rigid plans. If a waterhole goes sour or crowded, you pivot to the second string visiting order. If a wind lane shifts, you give it room. If clouds blanket your star roads, you drop to ground signs. Termite spires that lean a certain way, dew stripes at dawn on the windward side of grass, owl calls that announce when the night is halfway through their rhythm. A timepiece you can trust. Quirky tidbit that you insist on believing even when the others roll their eyes. Some old wanderers swear they can tell direction by lying on their backs with eyes closed and feeling the world's slow spin in the inner ear. Maybe that's romance. Maybe it's just a reason to rest for a minute. Toward pre-dawn, the east bruises from black to blue, and your mental map leans groundward again. You angle for the dry river fork with the 2 fingers. In its bed, someone long ago stacked stones into a knee-high line to catch sheet flow when the sky remembers rain. You take inventory of the small tanaja you cleaned last week. It held its lid, kept the dust out, and offers you a morning mouthful to pair with your roasted root. You log the condition in that part of your head where you keep maintenance lists. Historians still argue whether it was habit, like this tiny acts done daily by everyone, that multiplied into resilience, or whether the secret was charismatic leaders who remembered more roots than anyone else. Watching your band move like a quiet organism stitched together by shared memory. You feel the answer settle, drought bows to systems, not to heroics. Dawn finds you where you meant to be, not because the earth moved kindly, but because your mind did. You dust your hands on your thighs. Check the seals. Check the children. Check the elders. Check your stick notches. And reward the team with a joke so bad it tastes like luxury. 5-star review for the route tonight, you say. Excellent scenery, minimal lion conversation, complimentary dew. The groans are a choir. The fan of the day begins to turn the sun, hunting you again, but you've banked distance and memory and a few slim sips ahead. Your map lives, your map works, your map is you. Dawn hands you a soft square of shade, and you turn it into breakfast math. A small wedge of roasted root, 2 mouth-wetting sips from the eggshell, and the quiet promise of honey later, if the bird with opinions your honey guide decides to be helpful. You're not just eating, you're managing water. Food is a contract with digestion, and some foods are terrible negotiators. Lean meat bosses you around demanding extra water so your body can file the paperwork on nitrogen waste. Fat and slow carbs behave like polite guests. So, you choose like a miser with a good palate, more marrow than muscle, more tuber than trophy, more honey than heroics. Your stomach sighs in thanks, and your canteen doesn't file a complaint. You start with the bones because bones are banks. A long limb bone from last night's find, dropped by something with claws you didn't argue with, waits under a flat rock where you cached it. You lay it across your anvil stone and give it the kind of strike that marriages and droughts teach committed. The crack opens like a grin, and creamy marrow peeks out soft as room temperature hope. You tease it free with a sliver of wood and smear it onto a sliver of roasted root prehistoric toast, with butter, if we're being honest, and slightly decadent. Mainstream fact archaeologists read percussion marks and spiral fractures on ancient bones, like you read elephant roads. They show that people were cracking long bones for marrow deep in the Pleistocene sometimes, before meat cuts were gone, sometimes after the big mouths left. Historians still argue whether you were top-tier hunters or cunning scavengers in many of those scenes, or more likely both, depending on the moon and the mood, but the marrow doesn't care about the label. It feeds obedience back into your legs. You ration the protein like a grown-up at a festival. A strip of dried meat is fine. A feast of it would drink your water for you, Pima. Dry meat is a trap on a thirsty day, so when you eat it, you pair it with fat rendered from marrow dripped from roasted bones, or saved as glossy butter in a gourd sealed with beeswax. The trick of stone boiling you used for water works for soup too. Drop hot rocks into a hide or gourd with bone shards and small meat scraps. Let the fat lift and pool skim and save. Plains people far from here will perfect bone grease extraction in later ages. The logic is already humming in your hands. You call the result walking fuel and pretend it deserves a Michelin star, which earns you a withering look and your first joke quota for the morning. Tubers are your other faithful coin. You kneel at the patch you marked yesterday with that little cairn and lift 2 stubborn bulbs from their sandy bed. Some you slice and roast quickly, letting heat quiet the sharp chemistry so your mouth doesn't pout. Others you shave thin and lay on warm stone to dry, because dried slices turn back into food, with a few drops in the mouth and a patient chew, no boiling water required. When you face a bully of a root with bitter opinions, you lean on ash and thyme. A dusting of fine ash can soften astringency and baking in a pit. With coals and hot stones, your small earth oven coaxes sweetness without spending water. You tamp the pit and set a thorn marker. The land will remember for you until the smell tells you it's ready. Seeds and nuts join the council when the shrubs agree to participate. You crack mongongo or marula, where they grow, saving the butter-slick kernels for evening when morale needs a second wind. The fat refuses to nag you for water, which is why you treasure it. A battered grindstone lives under the ledge. You rub seeds into paste with a rhythm you could do in your sleep, and sometimes do. Mainstream fact, tucked under your fingers. Grinding stones and seed residues turn up in Paleolithic camps from Africa to the Levant. Proof that far before farms, hungry patience and clever stones turned small grains into dependable calories. Historians still argue whether droughts, the long ones that make lizards yawn, pushed your kind into this broad-spectrum menu earlier. or whether curiosity simply never waited for a crisis. Either way, your paste tastes like foresight. Insects are honest food that doesn't invoice your water budget rudely. Termites roasted on a shard go nutty and crisp. Locusts taste like popcorn that went to the gym. Fat grubs? Yes, those become buttery with a quick roast and a pinch of ash. You hear the children giggle at the idea of sky shrimp, and you solemnly declare tonight's menu will feature locust a la brise, which nets you. Joke number 2, and a scandalized look from a lizard. Quirky tidbit to savor with the crunch. Some folks pop a few grains of clean termite mound, clay now and then geophagy, to settle a jumpy stomach or to bind plant tannins. You take only what wisdom and the elders bless. Clay is for medicine, not for meals. Honey is morale bottled in gold. The honey guide scolds you into following, and you keep your promise from yesterday's smoke. Gentle share, fair leave the wax. The brood combs, rich with larvae, turn into soft protein that doesn't bully your water too much. The honey itself slides down like a stored sunrise. People like the Hadza will one day be famous in books you'll never read for this bird-brokered sweetness, but your version needs no headlines. You tuck a slab into a cool Nietzsche smear, a little on a roasted tuber sliver, for an indecently good breakfast dessert, and announce to the shade that your cafe now serves pastries. Joke number 3 lands with a sigh and a smile, which is all you require from comedy. Under a stingy sky. Greens still matter, but you treat them like learning, not like lunch. Strong leaves get singed and chewed as seasonings for your roots and bugs. The rare succulent you trust, because your grandmother told you its name with that voice that means, believe me or else, gives a careful mouthful of watery crunch. Milky saps keep their distance. Euphorbia's ghost still haunts the part of your memory labeled bad ideas. When greens anger your tongue, a lick of clean clay can settle the tantrum, that old geophagy trick again, though you never let the children experiment without an elder's nod. Your day's menu is timed like a traveling festival. Morning, roasted root and marrow smear, a few termites a sip. Midday, when movement is expensive, something fatty that doesn't ask for water-nut paste on dried tuber chips. Maybe a honey touch if spirits droop. Evening, small stew if you can spare the stones and liquid or ash-baked bulbs, and a sliver of dried meat, introduced to fat until it behaves. Night. The little sweet you promised honey. The color of last year's sunset. And one careful joke, because laughter is your 4th macronutrient. Rules of sharing, hum underneath. The strongest carry the heaviest. The heaviest get their wedding sips early. The elders taste the stew first, to judge whether the bitter root finished learning its manners. Children earn cook's privileges for small tasks, turning roast insects, minding the earth oven's breath, guarding the honey from that one jackal who always looks like a critic. Mainstream fact you can whisper while the stew sweats. In dryland forager bands, food-sharing rules are elaborate and enforce peace the way water rules are. Historians still argue whether strict sharing is a product of scarcity or a cause of survival. You suspect the answer is yes. You make room on your mental shelf for odd wisdom. If the mouth is desert dry, suck a clean, smooth pebble. Saliva returns like a shy animal, buying time without spending your stash. If someone craves salt so fiercely, their eyes go distant, you pass the ash-seasoned scraps. Sweat writes salt out of you faster than taste can ask for it. If a child keeps asking for sweet, you hand them a sliver of honeycomb and a long story. Stories, slow bites, and slow bites drink less. Even your trash is thrift. Bones, crack twice, once for marrow, later for grease. Tubers peel into the fire, releasing a smell that tells you whether a batch needs more patience. The rendered fat sleeps in a gourd wrapped in damp hide in the breeze. Remember your evaporative fridge, so dinner tastes like a favor the world forgot to revoke. When a wind gusts a mean breath of dust through camp, you tie a corner of hide over the bowls, the way you covered rock cups. Same logic, different scale. As night sidles back, you inventory quietly. The group feels fed, not stuffed. Alert, not jangly. Your water math balances with your menu. Fewer gulps demanded by digestion. more sips left for walking and waiting. You smile toward the eggshell flasks, lined up like well-behaved moons, and toward the little clay-lined bowl where the smoky cafe trick will boil tomorrow's doubts into something drinkable. If rain delays its entrance, you can repeat this song. Marrow roots, insects, honey seeds, calories that keep their voices down around your water. You finish the day by teasing the children with a scandalous rumor tomorrow's tasting board might include locust pâté if the winds are kind. The groans are affectionate. The fan hums in the dark, the thorn funnel whispers, and your body obedient. Now, well-fed, the dry way slides toward sleep with enough comfort to dream of a fat, glossy moon floating in a clean tanaja. The dream tastes like honey and roasted root, and when you wake, your feet will still want to walk. You build shade the way a careful person folds a letter clean lines. Good intentions, no wasted edges. The first rule is simple. Don't fight the sun head on. Sidestep it and make the wind do chores. You pick a spot where stone throws a morning eyebrow of shadow, and thorn scrub can be persuaded to act like a fence. With a few quick cuts, you stitch a low U-shaped windbreak of branches, mouths of the U yawning toward the day's prevailing breeze. A hide goes on top, but not flat, that's a rookie greenhouse. You pitch it in a shallow wedge, high at the hot side, low at the cool side, leaving a finger-wide gap along the crown, so hot air can escape. You've just built a lung. When the light climbs, the black skin warms, air rises, and the breeze you invited gets tugged through your little lounge like a polite servant with a fan. You know the trick isn't modern dark tents in drylands do the same thing, a physics duet of absorption and convection. Mainstream fact in the old world. Desert's goat hair black tents have long kept their owners cooler than you'd think, because they draw air upward and through, creating shade that breathes. Historians still argue whether your deep ancestors learned that principle first, from rocks and caves copying how cool air pools low, or whether cloth and hide shelters came before the understanding. You skip the academic panel and angle your roof until the smoke from your sleepy ember takes the exit ramp you built. Underfoot, you don't lie on bare ground unless you want to be slow cooked. Sand and stone whisper heat into bone. You weave a thick grass mat or cheat with a double layer of brush and a top coat of softened bark. If time allows you, scrape a shallow trench, no deeper than your forearm, and line it with cool sand from the shadow side of a rock. Earth remembers night, like a freezer remembers winter. You slip into that cool cradle at noon and feel a temperature drop that has nothing to do with miracles. Someone mumbles that you've invented a 5-star hotel, and you deadpan. Welcome to Dune and Duvet. Turn-down service includes one sad joke and a wet cloth for wrists. Joke 1 earns a grateful snort. You add a trick from last night's water kit, a damp hide wrap this time, not around a gourd, but around the windward edge of your shade. Evaporation borrows heat from the air as it leaves that same spa day physics you used to cool the canteen. With careful rations, you can keep a narrow band of hide barely moist, and the air slipping across it arrives a little kinder. If you're feeling extra, you hang a shallow dew net at dawn and wring it into that strip. It's not fog harvesting on a coastal dune, but even here the morning sometimes gives you a thumbprint of damp you can put to work. Clothing becomes architecture you wear. You pick loose weaves that trap a thin boundary layer, shade you can carry, and you color them according to what you have. If the hide is pale, so be it. If it's dark, you let the same convection trick breathe through it. A scarf wraps your head and neck. A strip of clay stripes your nose. Remember your pocket shade makeup, and your ankles and wrists get the damp band privilege when the breeze rises. You're not chasing fashion though. If anyone asks you, absolutely will launch your prehistoric capsule collection Dusty Chic, featuring clay contour and the new wind catch cut. Joke 2 runway approved by the shade. Caves and rock shelters are your big ticket rooms. You face them with a pilgrim's patience, turning your back on ones with bad air or bat guano that could pick a fight with your lungs, claiming the ones where soot on the ceiling testifies that people for a long time have trusted that mouth in the cliff. Mainstream fact rock shelters with soot-blackened vaults mark human use across continents. They're time capsules of hearths, sleeping hollows, and windbreak repairs. You pay the rent by cleaning tanajas, by keeping the drip ledges free of mud so the next rain doesn't hesitate, by stacking a modest wall at the mouth to curl the daytime wind into a whisper and keep night teeth second-guessing your silhouette. Not every shelter is a house. Some are a habit. You learn to walk inside moving shade where the slope throws a thin, dark ribbon, where your own bandmates' bodies make a pool you can share while you trade packs for a minute. You become fluent in shadow clocks when the acacia's spear shade lies under the trunk. It's trouble time. When it leans long, you negotiate motion. You trail the ridge's lip so that the sun has to fight stone to touch you. You side hill under cliffs where drip lines, stained black, tell you old water has kissed the lip and might again. You time your rests where breeze tastes like rock instead of dust. For sleeping, you go low. You've seen how cool air slides down and collects, how the lowest nook under a ledge is a basin for relief. You scoop a shallow bed, lay your mat and roof the foot end with a slanted slab to make a tiny personal wind tunnel. If you're in open brush country, your night shelter is a quick dome of ribs and thornhide, stretched over a low entrance away from the teeth parade and a smoke hole you can pinch shut with a palmful of clay when a wary cat passes. Quirky tidbit that people swear by when the world gets strange. If dunes sing at night a booming hum, some sands produce when they slip. You point the mouth of your shelter away from the sound. It's not science so much as superstition. But superstition that lets a child sleep has a job. When noon bullies you anyway, you turn to tiny rituals that make heat a partner instead of a judge. You soak your wrists and the crook of your elbows with a swab from the damp strip. Blood near the surface thanks you with a head that stops humming. You put a smooth pebble in your mouth to coax saliva without spending a sip, an old wanderer's habit that offends nobody but pride. You dust yourself with a whisper of cool ash at the joints to keep chafing from becoming a war. Crocodile dung sunscreen, someone teases. You point at your dignified clay nose and say, "We're staying with the classics, and that's joke 3, which buys you 3 quiet minutes of not thinking about sun." Housekeeping is survival. You retension lashings as hides stretch because a loose roof flaps and a flapping roof frays. You sweep sand from sleeping mats because sand eats skin by millimeters and will steal your stride by Thursday. You tuck fire under a little clay collar so embers stay tame because you'll need ash tonight for the cafe filter and tomorrow for the bitter root bake. You stash a spare eggshell flask under a flat stone near the shelter's back wall, not because you're forgetful, but because you're mortal in future. You sometimes arrives with a headache and gratitude. You mentor while you build. Children stack thorn in the ew's mouth to sharpen the wind. Elders sit where the shadow pool is darkest and point with sticks when a wall angle begs correction. You test the airflow with smoke and laughter. If the smoke leaves eagerly and the laugh lingers, your geometry is honest. Mainstream fact braided into the lesson. Simple wind catchers and earth-bermed shelters appear again and again across ancient drylands. The physics is generous and doesn't care what century you're in. Historians still argue whether the midday rest pattern, the siesta that so many cultures treat as sacred, owes more to heat and UV or to predator hours and water arithmetic. Your eyelids, heavy at noon and bright at dusk, cast their vote without talking. When the day's spite eases, your shelter stands like a quiet animal that did its job. No drama, just less sweat, steadier heartbeats, alert minds. Water rations that weren't bullied into foolish gulps. You pat the roof with a tenderness that surprises you. Architecture, it turns out, is just ethics with poles and hide spend. Little get much leave, no mess, and let the wind sing you cooler. You step out at last light and take stock. The U is aimed for tonight's breeze. The clay stripe on your nose has agreed to stay. The mat is off the ground. The damp strip is only slightly thirsty. The stars begin to pin their path above the ridge, reminding you that shelters are for days like this and nights like the ones you've already walked. rooms you carry with you, lungs you borrow from the wind, a shade song. You can hum even when the sun is mean. Tomorrow, if the sky stays stubborn, you'll fold this letter of shade again, and the wind will help you read it. You arrive at the seep like guests arriving early to a tiny restaurant that only serves 3 drops an hour. Nobody rushes the door. The place has rules, and you like the rules because rules mean your heart won't do foolish math. You plant a forked stick at the rim, your cue marker, and lay a second stick flat to show where the next person waits in the shade. Weapons go down, points turned away. Eyes stay soft. The eggshell flask becomes your measuring cup, each wetting sip counted by the same little song you use for stone boiling. 4 slow heartbeats, swallow, breathe, pass. You whisper, "Welcome to Cafe Charcoal now," with a very strict seating policy, and the shade pays you with a smile that spends no water. You appoint a waterkeeper for the morning. It's not a crown, it's a chore. They crouch by the trickle pluck grit, with a willow twig, coax the drip into the shell, and call the line forward, one by one, with a palm down wave. The scouts rotate as lookouts on the rim because a water point is also a bulletin board for teeth. Children sit with the elders where the shade is thickest, and the jokes are mellow learning, with their ears how a cue feels when it's working. Same rules as yesterday, you murmur. Shells, not gulps. Carriers, elders, kids, then the rest. No secret sips. The only thing worse than thirst is suspicion. Mainstream fact across drylands. Forager bands keep the peace with sharing rules as exact as recipes. Who drinks first, who carries how much stays cached. In the Kalahari, people braid those rules into wider safety nets, like Hexaro gift exchange. In southern Africa, tiny ostrich eggshell beads once traveled hundreds of kilometers, stringing groups into drought insurance long before anyone said network. Historians still argue whether those bead chains were built first and foremost to spread risk during bad years, or whether marriage ties and friendship came first. And the drought insurance was a blessed side effect. You don't mind which way the story leans. You just feel how light your pack becomes when another camp recognizes your beads and your promises. You keep tempers on ration too. Pride drinks fast. You use the old trick the elders love, insulting the water cousin to insulting the meat. When someone brings a brimming shell, you tisk and say, "Ah, muddy tea. We'll survive somehow," which lets the bringer smile without swelling. Humor is a canteen that never runs dry unless you push it. 3 jokes, 1,000 words is your house limit. You've already spent 1. Spend 2 wisely. The line breathes. While you wait, you break problems into small tasks that don't sweat much. One person mends a strap with thorn needle and sinew. Another crushes fresh charcoal to refresh the filter cone. A child fans gnats away from the slit where the trickle collects. Work is a lullaby. It hums the nerves quiet. You model the kind of whisper that keeps the bedrock from hearing your plans, just in case the cat from yesterday is lazing 2 dunes away listening for hope. When a new band appears out of heat shimmer, you go still, then predictable. Open hands, a slow nod. Your cue marker stays put. Fairness is a banner predators understand rival humans too. You remember the truce song your grandparents used when 2 lines had to share 1 trickle call and answer phrases about rain having 10 fingers and nobody owning a drop that hasn't fallen yet. Mainstream fact from far forests, rather than this scrub Central African foragers, braid cooperation into music polyphonic singing that keeps time for tasks and tempers. The point isn't harmony for its own sake, it's coordination you can hum. Historians still argue whether ritual grew to manage scarce resources like water and meat, or whether ritual came first, and only later, moonlighted as conflict insurance. Either way, a repeatable song is a handrail everyone can hold in the dark. You keep a ledger in your head: who arrived, who drank, who carried who, gave up a turn when the child's lips looked paper dry. Nobody writes anything. Reputation writes itself. If someone cheats, If a furtive sip glints where it shouldn't, the penalty isn't a fight. It's an extra day hauling gourds, or night duty over the wick cords, or trading your honey for someone else's patience. Restorative justice costs less water than shouting. You've seen how quickly mine can sour the line. The drought loves that word more than lions do. Quirky tidbit: one granny in an anti-camp taught you the spit handshake. It's exactly what it sounds like. And yes, you grimaced the first time. A tiny spit in the palm, a press and release, then straight to the water queue where nobody cuts in front of a wet palm. She swore the water spirits hate it when people jostle. The handshake shames the line into kindness. Is that science? No. Does it work? Absolutely, and honestly, it's less gross than crocodile dung sunscreen, which we have firmly retired from the runway. Rules aren't only about turns, they're about timing. You schedule the big fills for the hour the elephants drift off and the cats are yawning. You split the band into sippers and haulers so the trickle isn't blocked by gossip. You assign a talker whose job is to keep the tone boring in a good way. Drama has a thirst problem. Your talker reviews wind stars, next cash, next shade bullet points that taste like competence. Someone mutters that we've invented a waterhole HR department. You whisper, "Yes, please take a number. We'll be with you in 4 drops," which qualifies as joke 2 and earns a glare with a smile tucked inside it. You keep the old taboos because some rules carry more than physics in their pockets. No eating right at the rim, crumbs attract teeth. No washing bodies in the trickle sacred isn't just holy, it's hygienic. No naming rain with big bragging words, the sky is a ham, and hates being told what to do. A finger laid across the lips means hush. Listen for hooves. 2 fingers held low, say cue is paused. Danger checks. A palm circling ankle high means jackal, not lion. We're fine. Your hands speak even when your mouth saves water. A stranger strays close with the stiff walk of someone who's tried to sip pride and found it dry. You greet them with the beads at your neck. Not the pretty ones, the traveled ones, etched eggshell discs, smooth with many hands. They answer by touching a similar strand. And suddenly the rules turn into hospitality. 2 shells for their elder, a place in your shade, a share of nut paste on dried root. You do not give away everything. Generosity that empties you is just a pretty name for tomorrow's hunger. But you show your math and invite them to check it. Transparency is how a line stays a line. When a child bumps the cue marker, you don't scold. You reset the forked stick together and make a small theater of the gesture, upright planted, angle just so. You explain again how the shadow from the stick's fork points to the waiting place when the sun climbs, how fairness casts a measurable line. Mainstream fact tucked into the lesson in many drylands, people used shadow sticks as clocks and compasses. Shade geometry is older than most calendars. Historians still argue whether your earliest laws were born at food and water points or around hearths. You think the hearth teaches how to share warmth. The water teaches how not to forget it. You keep space in the day for gratitude disguised as maintenance. You repack the clay lip that prevents the trickle from eroding. You brush the tiny channel clear with a feather. You lay a flat stone as a lid when you leave so birds don't fall in and ruin tomorrow with a sad surprise. You cache a sealed eggshell under a marked rock triangle of 3 stones, remember, and scuff your footprints away. Future you is a person you treat with respect. Afternoon pushes heat like a bully again, and you fold the cue sippers out haulers back to shade lookouts down from the rim with their eyes still soft. You pass the last shell around and toast with the smallest arrogance to the committee. You whisper, "May our minutes remain short and our meetings well hydrated." That's joke 3 and it lands like a cool cloth on a hot forehead. As you step away, the waterkeeper lingers to pat the clay collar into place the way you patted the roof of dune and duvet earlier. Cooperation feels like that small kindnesses to structures that saved you. The line dissolves back into a band, and the band dissolves into shade and wind lanes, and the quiet promise of evening's star maps. You shoulder the gourds, check the seals, nod to the strangers in their borrowed cool, and feel how trust makes your feet lighter. Alone you can drink. Together you can wait. In the dry season, waiting is the real feast. Dusk lays a cool hand on your neck, and you answer with a different kind of work, the kind that doesn't move your feet, but steadies them. You clear a circle with the flat of your palm, a quiet space between thorn and ember, and you set 3 small stones like teeth, taken from the day one for the water. You found one for what you kept, one for what you promised to share. No one says the word ritual out loud. It would feel like wearing a fancy shirt to haul firewood. You simply do the things your elders did when the sky forgot how to be generous. You begin with the sky because it's the only ceiling you ever had. Tonight, the moon floats just shy of full, wearing a pale halo, a ring that whispers of ice high above of winds, writing circles where you can't follow. You trace the ring for the children and tell them the rule: a wide, thin halo means the air is carrying a message from far water. 2 nights from now, maybe a change, maybe a polite nothing, mainstream fact lurking in your bedtime voice. A lunar halo often does mean high cirrostratus and a front somewhere out there limping along. You refuse to get giddy. You make your patients do stretches and deep breathing the way you'd warm up a stiff calf. Historians still argue whether people in your deep past read these sky signs with consistent science, or whether it's hindsight that paints method onto lucky guesses. You shrug and keep watching. A habit that buys you calm is already doing its job. A low song starts because your hands need something to hold. Clap, clap, heel tap. Clap, clap, heel tap. Nothing showy, just the old pulse that makes elbows loosen and shoulders lower. You lean into the circle and feel the rhythm nudge the camp into one heart, far to the south and far into later books. People will write about trance dances that heat the medicine in the body until it boils and spills into the group as healing. Some call it, and the dancers paint rain animals on stone. Here, your version is quieter. You sing the names of the year's landmarks in the order the rain should visit them, and you make the melody lean toward the place you want the clouds to go. Is it meteorology? Is it magic? The children don't care. They're learning how to wait without breaking. You tie omens to ordinary things, so hope has handholds. If owls call close 3 times, you treat it as a reminder to check the wick cords at midnight. If ants shift their eggs higher in the mound, you agree to walk the rim of the dry pan at dawn, just in case a skin of water tried to be born where you last saw only shine. You collect tiny rules like beads light to carry useful to trade. Quirky tidbit from your grandmother that still makes the teenagers roll their eyes. If you sleep with a flat, cool pebble under your tongue, you do not actually swallow it. Thank you. Your dreams will be easier to remember, and dreams sometimes remember rain before you do. You keep the stone under your pillow instead. The mind negotiates better when the mouth doesn't trip over geology. The honey guide scolds from the scrub as if filing a customer service complaint about your singing, and you thank it anyway. You add a smear of honey to a pinch of ash and press that paste into a hair-thin crack in your clay pot. Sweetness persuades stubborn seams, the elders say, and you feel yourself smile, even as you know that pots don't listen. Practical and poetic keep shaking hands in drought. You let them. Your charms are small and portable, because everything you own must move when the stars say move. A twist of beeswax pressed with the crosshatch pattern you use on eggshell beads. A cord of grass with 3 knots, 2 for yesterday's sips, 1 for tomorrow's, worn around the wrist where the damp strip sometimes cools the blood. You don't worship these things. You let them anchor willpower to muscle. When you touch the knots, you remember your promise to take wedding sips, not gulps. When you feel the bead's ridges, you remember to insult the water with a smile so no one in camp has to perform pride. Nice muddy tea, you murmur to the shell. I suppose we'll survive. The camp pretends not to grin. Patience is also architecture. You set a small stake at the edge of camp and scratch marks where its shadow falls at dawn, at noon, at late afternoon. Tomorrow, You'll compare, and the day after that looking for the slightest drift that might mean the season tilting toward mercy. Mainstream fact, tucked into your dusty pocket, gnomons shadow sticks became calendars in lands you will never see. Shade geometry teaches time, even when numbers haven't learned to strut. Historians still argue whether your earliest calendars were made for hunting for love or for ceremonies that asked the sky to behave. Tonight, your scratch marks are for staying sane while you wait. Stories wear patience like a shawl. You tell the one about the first thirsty band that learned to borrow from rocks, how the cliff gave a single sullen drop when someone hummed under their breath and didn't stare too hard. You tell the one about a mantis who brought rain because people danced politely, and about an ill-mannered jackal who scared it away with jokes. He refused to ration you, glance meaningfully at your own mouth, and earn joke one for the night. The children learn the shape of consequences without you having to lay down law. The teens learn that mockery is expensive. The adults remember why your rules at Cafe Charcoal feel sacred, even when they're just sensible. You practice the gentle superstitions that cost nothing and buy quiet. You never point your entire hand at the moon, only a knuckle, because the moon is shy, and shyness is easier to respect than to fix. You drop 3 grains of nut paste near the seep when you leave, not because ghosts eat, but because you want your body to remember that water isn't owned, it's visited. You wrap the gourds with damp hide before singing, so no one feels they must stare at the stash. Eyes on jars breeds thirst you don't need. In the lull, you do the patient crafts that make tomorrow less loud. You drill another eggshell with a fire-heated thorn, twirling gently until a neat pore hole opens and the shell becomes future water and future jewelry both. Mainstream fact you like repeating because it feels like a bead in your mouth. People engraved and strung ostrich eggshell beads over vast distances. The trails of those beads treat like faint paths across maps. Archaeologists will argue over later. Historians still argue whether the strings were mostly fashion, mostly friendship, or mostly a ledger of obligations in lean years. For you, a bead is a hello that works on strangers and a promise you can wear. At midnight, you rise to your tiny rites of maintenance. You visit the wick cords under the ledge with the same tender seriousness you'd bring to a baby's blanket, wringing 2 slow mouthfuls into the waiting shell and setting the cord again. You kneel by the dew net, breathe on the grass to feel if the air has kept a secret, and you accept that tonight it hasn't. You whisper thanks anyway, because gratitude trains the mind better than complaint trains the sky. On the walk back, you touch the doorpost of Dune and Duvet, the yew of thorn, and hide you angled yesterday, and give it a little pat as if you own a hotel and your hotel behaved. Joke 2. Please rate your stay. 5 stars for airflow, 1 star for minibar. The stars decline to comment. Someone asks Sleepy whether it's silly to sing for rain when the sky is full of old coins and not a single drop. You answer with the truth. You trust that rituals are not a bribe. They're a metronome. They keep your hands doing the right small things, checking seals, sharing fairly watching shadows until the work you can't touch decides to meet you. If the rains come, you'll say the song helped. If they don't, the song still kept the line from tearing. Patience is a tool. You sharpen it like any other by using it out loud. Before sleep, you lift your face to the moon one more time and offer your best manners a nod, a half shrug. That means we'll be here either way. You tuck the beads under your cheek, set the shell where your hand can find it without clatter, and breathe like someone ironing a crumpled shirt. Long, slow strokes that remind the heart it has other jobs than wanting. Joke 3 waits at the doorway and whispers as you drift. Tomorrow, we'll host our famous weather conference. Keynote speaker, a cloud. The camp's soft groan is the last good omen you need. The night holds. The halo fades. Your patient marks in the dust gleam like dull silver in the moonlight. You sleep not because the drought ended, but because you gave it a place in the schedule and told it to wait while you rested. You approach the water not like a hero, but like a rumor, soft, precise, ready to vanish if the story turns bad. First rule, the wind is your lawyer. You face it, let it carry your scent away from the rim, and walk a route that keeps your silhouette broken. Knee bent behind, brush shoulder curved against stone. No bold skyline poses for the lion paparazzi. You place a lookout where Auntie's acacia can frame the pan, and another upwind where even the air has to tell you its secrets before it reaches the water. Your eyes read the surface like a nervous letter. Big ripples that start and stop without a bird landing. That's not a breeze, that's a crocodile tasting conversations. You scan the mud for a hippo's half-moon prints wide deep, the sort of punctuation that ends arguments abruptly. If those signs are fresh, you keep the children on the second bench of shade, not the front row. Mainstream fact in the dry season. Predators and big herbivores stack around remaining water. Lions pattern their ambushes there. Crocs hold still like rumor, and many herds shift their visits to low-light hours to dodge teeth. You're not above copying the herd logic. You time your fill for the hour when cats are yawning and elephants have wandered toward better bark. Silence isn't just polite, it's armor. You sign your plan with hands and eyebrows, the same soft language you used at Cafe Charcoal. The water keeper becomes the minute keeper 3 shells. Then stand, then slide out. No crouching so long, your knees forget you're alive. The carriers kneel on stone, not mud. No splashy edits to your soundtrack. Someone's job is to watch the watchers baboons in the rim trees, glossy-eyed and rude but honest about danger. Doves jittery on the ground. That one lapwing who tattles about everything. When birds go mute all at once, you treat the quiet like a shout. You bring ash with you, not as seasoning, but as theater. A swipe on wrists and ankles dulls shine. A rub along the soles can soft muffle the squeak of dry skin on rock. Quirky tidbit your uncle swears by: if you crack a dry twig into 3 and tuck the pieces under your belt, you split your smell and confuse noses. Is it physics? Maybe not. Does it win you 3 extra calm heartbeats? It just did. You'll take it along with the clay stripe still guarding your nose like a sensible portable shadow from Dune and Duvet. On the animal side of the truce, you practice polite presence. You don't crowd zebra. You don't bully antelope off a patch of damp. If an elephant steps in, you make yourself into a very humble rock and let the caravan pass. A trunk dug well may lie 3 handspans away. You won't use it until the giants do and move on, because the etiquette here is written large and tusked. If hippo grunts percus from the reeds, you skip the reed edge entirely. Hippos are the lifeguards of this pool, and they have 0 chill. Joke 1. Welcome to Hippo's Bar and Grill Happy Hour. Is never dress code is not you. Then there are the rivals who speak your language. 2 figures come shimmering over the flats, their beads telling the same story as yours. Traded far handled often promises in circles. The truce is older than either camp. A slow palm eyes, soft cue marker, planted 3 shells each by turns. If both bands need more than the trickle can serve before the sun gets teeth again, you barter time with gifts that don't drink honey, a coil of cord, a hide patch sewn by a grandmother who puts love in every stitch. You make it clear what you're not trading the last sealed eggshell under your cairn. Generosity that empties you is theater. You're here to live, not audition. The politics glint in small places. A man from the other band wears a jackal tail on his belt. You know the custom, it's not a trophy. It's a reminder to keep your voice low, where lions like to read the ground. You mirror the courtesy with your own soft badge, the weave of grass knots around your wrist. 2 for yesterday's sips, 1 for tomorrow's, showing you ration by rule, not by mood. Historians still argue whether truces like these beads and turns and gift debts grew mostly from drought pressure, or whether they were always there and drought merely sharpened them. Standing in the hush where cats do math, you suspect scarcity wrote the first draft, and kindness edited it for style. When you must fill after dark, you script every step. 2. Watchers, 1 upwind, 1 downwind. 1 carrier kneels, 1 relieves both with their bodies angled to throw the smallest shadow on the pool. You do not bring showy fire. A coal in a hollow stick is enough if you need a signal. Flames turn your silhouettes into gossip columns. You listen for that seesaw saw of hyenas debating whether your ankles are essays they want to read. You smell for rot on the water's breath. Stagnation trying to make you pay for your thirst with a stomach rebellion, which you already plan to beat with stone boiling and charcoal at camp. Mainstream fact: you treat like law the quieter the water, the louder the microbes. Boiling is your judge, jury, and parole board. Traps are for other days, not for the rim. You don't set snares where everything comes to sip. You don't poison a pool because you just poisoned your luck. Hunger can turn ethics into what if, but the band has stories for that cautionary plays you perform by firelight about hunters who salted their own wells with impatience. You keep your cleverness for places where it won't bankrupt the neighborhood. Not all rivals have human faces. A massive bull elephant steps in with the slow entitlement of someone whose ancestors paved your road. You lower your eyes, tilt your shoulders small and back out sideways. Elephants watch for confidence the way cats watch for weakness. You offer neither, only respect. If the old bull starts to dig, you wait. When he leaves, you let the dust settle and approach the rough circle he opened. That well is public now in the oldest sense of public there is. Sometimes the truce is negotiated with time, not talk. You mark the hour a lioness crosses the north bank 3 nights in a row and shift your visit so your shadow falls on the south bank when the moon is low. You learn the rhythm of a croc's patrol, where the tail swishes where the water barely sighs, and fill from the quietest angle with the longest stick. You own a ladle on a leash. You swap silence for minutes. You pay attention and live. The little hazards try to collect fees as well. Mosquitoes you mutter softly slapping a wrist, the true landlords of water. Joke 2 collects an eye roll and a smile. You burn a curl of damp grass for smoke without flame, which buys you a circle of mercy around ankles and necks. You breathe shallow near the surface so your scent doesn't make eddies on the skin of the pool. You never ever put your face to the water like a deer. As much as your tongue begs, face down is a prayer position a croc loves. Kneel high, pour low, get out. Fights are expensive. You hoard peace the way you hoard shade. If a hot voice rises in your own line, you deploy the old joke as gasket. Please direct all complaints to management. You whisper gesturing at a very bored lapwing. We accept feedback in the form of silence. Joke 3 works. It buys enough quiet to finish the fills. If tempers still swell, you invoke the rule of distance. The angriest pair take 20 paces opposite directions and count their breaths to a number agreed in the cool hours. When they return, the water looks less like an opponent and more like an ally with boundary issues. You leave the rim as lightly as you arrived. Clay, lip-padded lid stone, set shallow prints, brushed cue marker, hidden behind a tuft that only your children will recognize next time. The other band lifts their palms. You lift yours back. No grand words, no promises the sky can break for you later. Just beads that say, we showed up like neighbors and left like guests. On the walk away, you feel the shakiness that comes after choreographed danger, and you let it drain without making a speech. You tilt water into 3 mouths, wipe another thin layer of ash along your shins to keep the grass bites quiet, and aim for the wind lane that leads to Auntie's acacia. You've learned the politics of thirst bravery looks good on cave walls, but in the real world, silence pays better dividends. The predators still prowl. The rivals still shimmer in the distance, and the water is still the most important person in every room. You bowed to all 3 and didn't spill a drop. You spread your kit in the shade like a traveling shop. Everything small, everything smart, everything designed to make a single drop behave. There's your gourd with its beeswax grin. The 2 ostrich eggshell flasks wrapped in grass so they don't clink like gossip. A coil of twisted cord that works as a wick. A reed straw polished slick by teeth. Plugs carved from soft wood, a thumb of tree resin, a twist of wax, a palm-sized pinch of fine ash, and your proudest invention, a sip stick, a short baton with notches that tell you exactly how many mouth wettings a person gets before the next star break. You don't hoard hope, you meter it. The eggshells get first attention. You twirl a heated thorn in a neat circle until the pore hole opens a doorway the size of patience. The shell gives a faint, chalky sigh. You answer with a smear of beeswax around the lip, so the plug will seat with the authority of an elder. The plug itself is a wedge of soft wood, wrapped in a twist of grass, then kissed with resin. When it cools, you try to shake a drip loose and fail. You draw 2 crisp calibration scratches on the shell's belly, one for a child's wedding sip, one for an adult's, so the cafe charcoal line keeps its manners even when tongues get persuasive. Mainstream fact in southern Africa, people used ostrich eggshell flasks for water, and archaeologists have found engraved shells older than many languages. You know caches buried for later, a savings account in white calcium. You carry your account on a grass cord. The shells cushioned the plugs, tied with keepers, so you can't drop tomorrow by mistake. You move to the gourds with a tenderness that belongs in a lullaby. Bottle gourds are the world's polite gift to thirsty walkers, light, tough, hollow. You rub beeswax into an old scar pack, a crack with resin, mixed with ash, and polish the neck until your plug takes the hint. In other valleys and other centuries, people will domesticate these gourds for containers long before anyone grows grain. The plant is a traveling bottle. Historians still argue whether it crossed the ocean on its own fat buoyancy to reach the Americas or rode in some ancestor's canoe, an early stowaway invited on purpose. You don't take sides. You fill seal and hang your gourd inside a damp hide wrap, the same evaporative spa that made Dune and Duvet breathe, then sling it in the wind gap so the air steals a little heat and gives back a little kindness. Water has 2 personalities, hard to find, easy to spill. You design against the second. A ring of grass sits under every container mouth to catch stray drips. Your pour always happens over the clay-lined palm bowl, never over sand, because sand eats secrets. You lash each eggshell into a cradle basket and tie the cradle to a shoulder yoke, a springy branch with its bark left on, so the sway of your walk becomes a gentle cradle, not a collision course. Anyone who thinks you over-engineer hasn't watched a full shell knock a rock and become art. Joke 1. Welcome to the Museum of Modern Sorrow. Our featured exhibit is Oops, There Goes Tuesday. You teach the reed straw 2 tricks. First, it's a reacher slided it into a tight rock seam and sip from the pooled shadow without stirring the mud like an amateur bartender. Second, pack it with a short plug of grass and a pinch of crushed charcoal, and the straw becomes a little politeness filter. Nothing to replace the boil you trust, but enough to take grit out of a crack sip and keep your teeth from crunching geology. You keep the straw on a cord that runs through your hair knot. Losing one is how foolishness becomes autobiography. Wicks are quiet magicians. You spin plant fibers and lay the cord into damp seams at dusk, draping the other end into a waiting shell. Gravity and capillary stubbornness do the rest. You upgrade the setup with a tiny drip teacher, a sliver of bone tied where the water falls, so the drip always lands square in the shell's mouth, and not beside it at 2 in the morning when no one is awake to apologize. You also rig a night sip for an elder, a shell half buried in cool sand, a cord running to a mouth-sized knot near their pillow, a reed pinch to close it. If thirst wakes them, one squeeze buys a polite bead on the tongue without spilling tomorrow. Quirky tidbit the children adore, your grandmother swears that if you whisper thanks into the knot before sleep, the cord drips truer. You whisper anyway. Science and courtesy share a tent in drought. Seals are an art. Rawhide shrinks as it dries, your favorite physics party trick, so a strip wetted and wrapped tight around a gourd neck will tighten into a permanent bracelet that stops leaks you can't see. Resin stiffens, wax in heat, ash dusted onto resin, makes a quick gritty mastic that grips like a small honest handshake. If a seam misbehaves, a warmed beeswax snake coiled along it becomes a gasket your teeth can bite and your fingers can mend. Far away in time and place, other hands will distill staggy black birch tar to glue stone to wood. Neanderthals managed that pitch trick ages before you. You don't need tar tonight, but the idea that old fires figured out bottles and glue makes your brain feel tall. Some tools stretch drops by stopping mouths. The sip stick gets passed with the shell. One notch per person at morning, the second at noon, the rest saved for the quiet hours when tempers go sugar low. You string drink tokens from ugly beads, the kind even your honey guide wouldn't wear 1 token per promised sip. When someone needs to trade for a turn, they slap a token into your palm. The ledger lives on a string, not in a grudge. Mainstream fact braided into the lesson. Across drylands, sharing systems come with objects, beads, sticks, knots that carry memory for the group. Reputations ride on these cords, longer than footprints, ride on hardpan. The kids roll their eyes at the drama. You grin and keep the props, stop quarrels cold. Carrying becomes choreography. A 2-shell harness rides your chest like a sleepy infant wrapped so your arms swing free for a digging stick or a child's hand. A 3-point sling keeps a heavier gourd nestled high where your breath won't bump it. You thread the strap across the ribs so the container's weight rides on big bones, not protesting muscles. You show the apprentices how to bind grass between shells so they never touch silence is a safety device at Hippo's Bar and Grill. You even pack a spill blanket, a palm-wide ring of woven grass you drop around a pour site in case your hand stutters. The blanket catches what clumsiness would feed to sand. Then there's the wind cabinet. You lash 3 sticks into a tripod, hang a gourd in its damp wrap at the center, and pin one leg to the mouth of your U-shaped windbreak, so the breeze must pass the gourd's skin. It's a portable, polite refrigerator. At noon, when Dune and Duvet breathes, the cabinet does too. At night, the wrap comes off to keep the container from shivering precious cool away. If someone suggests upgrading to a minibar, you remind them with mock solemnity that we did that joke already in our hotel review. Joke 2 redeemed with a sheepish grin. Tools also measure time. You notch a drip clock on a sliver of bone 5 scratches between sunrise and the time the wick fills half a shell on a typical dry day. When clouds freight the air with more damp. The clock runs fast. You learn ahead of your tongue that the night's harvest will improve. You etch another bone for boil. Beats how long it takes your stone-boiling rocks to push a gourd to a rolling rumor. The beat keeps your mind steady and your stones honest. Historians still argue whether time discipline like this grew out of hunger heat or ritual. You keep all 3 bones in a little grass wallet and pretend you invented engineering. You maintain your tools like their relatives. Shells get rinsed with boiled water and a shake of clean sand, then air-dried upside down so memory doesn't nest in the curve. Plugs get reheated and reseated as wax slumps in the afternoon. Cords get combed with a thorn to remove grit that would foul wicks. The reed straw gets a thread drawn through it now and then like floss for a very skinny tooth. You store everything under rock lips or inside the cool shadow behind your mat. Sunlight eats tools the way dunes eat stories. Caches become libraries. Under stones marked with your quiet triangle, you leave sealed shells upright in sand, a grass loop over each as a handle for your future hand. You scratch the simplest code where only your eyes will read it 1 tiny line for 1 shell, 2 for 2. Never more than you can afford to forget. A brush sweep erases your prints. A song notch in your mind ties the cache to a star, a tree, a joke. If a stranger finds your triangle and leaves it unbroken, you repay the courtesy. At Hippo's polite presence buys years you can't see yet. Last you design for the mouth itself. You teach wedding swirl press against cheeks, swallow slow, until children do it even in dreams. You carry a smooth pebble to roll under the tongue when your mouth becomes paper. Saliva answers the call without stealing a sip. You mix a thimble of honey and a smear of nut paste into an evening lick that coaxes the throat to stop bargaining for gulps. And when someone breaks the rule and takes a heroic swallow, you don't write a tragedy. You hand them the sip stick and put them in charge of measuring until their body remembers why you invented the stick. Humor rides shotgun. Congratulations, you whisper. You are now Assistant Regional Manager of Thirst. Joke 3 lands with an eye roll and compliance. By the time the stars peer in, your kit is packed small and smug, your seals hold your shells, gleam like moons, and your cords are already sipping on your behalf. The drought is still rude, but your tools make it. Answer questions. It doesn't like how little can I lose? How slowly can I spend? How precisely can I share? You shoulder the yolk nest, the gourd in its hush, tuck the reed into your hair knot, and feel your odds lengthen the way a shadow does when the sun finally learns some manners. You send 2 bodies ahead on quiet feet, not because you're timid, but because you're economical. Scouts are the interest your band earns on caution. Small investments that pay in fewer detours, fewer arguments with claws, fewer jokes you have to make to keep nerves from fraying. You pick them for different reasons. One with eyes that catch hairline cracks. One with a nose that reads dust, the way you read a friend's mood. You give them a palmful of nut paste, 1 wetting sip each, and a bundle of instructions wrapped in the unspoken, go in the cool. Return with a path, not a story. Movement is a choreography you could whisper in your sleep. In the blue hour before the sun remembers your name, the line stretches a lead scout tracing with toes. 2 flanks that are more like ears than eyes. A rear walker who erases the camp's little signatures. The coal ash, pinch, the flattened grass, the triangle stone that protects a cache. You've learned that spacing is kindness. Nobody steps in another's dust devil or stumbles into a sudden halt. When the ground turns to chatter pebbles that want to gossip underfoot, you switch to the silent gate heel. Barely kisses weight, sinks on the outside edge. Edge toes place the decision. Your body becomes a hand smoothing a wrinkled cloth. Joke 1 whispered and rationed. Welcome to tonight's yoga class. Pose 1, don't wake the hippo. You dress your feet like tools. Bare signals grow a memory for thorns. Acacia sicklebush devil's thorn. Each leave their own sermons, but even memory punctures. You carry a sliver of bone to tease a barb backward along the wound channel. A curl of spider silk. Yes, really, to swab a pinprick, so the dust won't haunt it, and a smear of fat and ash to seal the complaint. Hide sandals when you have them get a midsole of woven grass. The grass hisses on grit, and that hiss is a quieter story than the slap of raw skin. You keep a narrow strip of damp hide tied above each ankle. A quick swipe cools blood at the surface and tricks your head into thinking the day is kinder than it is. Scouts move even slimmer. They wear quiet on their bodies' shells, wrapped so they don't clink like gossip reed straw tucked along the spine, gourd light enough to carry in one hand, plugs tied with keepers. Each carries a single coal in a hollow stick. For the emergency, you hope today forgets to schedule. They travel the windward lip of a slope so scent travels away. They count steps between cover. They crouch where the land hums a bit cooler and taste the air the way you did back in Section 2. Dust bitterness, stone breath, that miracle hint of geosmin if the world is in a good mood. Mainstream fact, to set like a cairnmaster trackers in real drylands, can read hard ground as if it didn't dare lie. Sand trackers have been shown to follow individual animals for hours by the faintest scuff on crust. The angle of crushed grass, the rhythm of stride that betrays a limp or a hurry speculative hunting. Some researchers call it where logic and sign weave a moving picture. Your scouts do the same, though they'd call it Tuesday. Historians still argue whether bands like yours assigned career scouts or rotated the job so every adult could do enough of everything. Watching your people, you suspect the truth is both. Some hands get famous, all hands learn. You teach signal the way you taught cue manners at Cafe Charcoal, repeatable, boring, life-saving. A small stone on a flat rock is safe to this point. 2 stones with a gap is detour around teeth. 3 in a triangle, your band's private sign means cachet ahead. Mind our debt to tomorrow. You bend a grass blade toward the next shade you hang. A tuft of hair on a thorn at a fork. Yes, it grows back, and yes, the kids think it's gross. You scratch a line on the shaded side of a termite mound to tell which wind lane petted your face 10 minutes ago. Quirky tidbit handed down from an auntie who collects eccentricities. Some scouts bite a stem of wild basil or mint and let a sprig ride behind one ear. The scent shifts with the slightest breeze, a perfume compass you don't have to stare at. Snares are the strangers you can't see. You sweep the path with a reed before you sweep it with your shin. Wire is rare in your centuries, but rawhide nooses and springy branches lurk where game trails narrow. You read for disturbed dust at ankle height, for the faint, unnatural curve of a bent sapling, for a feather tucked into a bush. Some trappers mark their own mischief so they can find dinner later. Your rule is the same as at Hippo's Bar and Grill. You do not eat where everyone must drink, and you do not set traps where everyone must walk. Hunger tries to renegotiate that ethic. You make the band recite it like a lullaby until their bellies believe you. Strangers with thirsty eyes are their own weather. When a silhouette appears downwind and slow, you rehearse courtesy like choreography. Hands open, chin lifted just enough to be seen, but not to challenge beads. Visible those traveled eggshell discs with their shared grammar. You don't let a stranger into dune and duvet. You meet them in the shoulder of shade by the cue marker stick. The scouts do the arithmetic. How many gourds, how many carriers, how far from the next honest wind. The talker does the talking, small gifts that don't drink cord patch. Promise small requests that don't accuse. Which way did the sandgrouse arrow? If the air turns tight, you back the line toward stone and make the shade smaller rather than louder. Grown-ups with dry mouths respect quiet geometry more than speeches. You move in the cool hours with the mind of a reed, flexible, anchored. When the moon bleaches the land into a flat sheet, the scouts break the plain by crawling a palm width lower so the smallest ridge makes relief. They lay a finger along a footprint and lift it. If dust clings to skin, that print is young. If it falls away without flirting, the maker has a head start you can't afford to chase. Sometimes a scout rests their cheek on a track. The ground's chill tells a story to the skin that eyes miss. Face down near Crocs is a know you whisper. Face down on hardpan is a maybe. That's joke 2. Spend it wisely. The band learns quiet feet as a posture, not just a trick. You practice moving as if you were pouring water downhill. No starts, no splashes, just pressure that settles and goes. You wrap grass around a digging stick's butt so it won't clack against stone. You bind a tiny rattle from an old beetle's shell and tie it low on one ankle, not for noise, but as a metronome. If it chatters, you're sloppy. Kids hate it until they love it. Elders love it until they forget it's there. Navigation stitches through it all. Your scouts pin the path to sky again, 3 bright points leaning toward a dark notch, and to wind lanes that comb the grass. They leave a joke tucked in a landmark for the children to find. Later, a stick figure with a clay nose under Auntie's acacia, a reminder that crocodile dung sunscreen remains retired from the fashion week of your life. When the young ones laugh at the clay, they also memorize the tree, the notch, the safe crossing. Memory rides better on a giggle than on a lecture. Hazards get triaged like chores. Briars get sliced, not yanked. Dust gets breathed through a strip of damp hide, not argued with. Heat gets scheduled, not endured. The Scouts report comes back in a language the band understands without thinking. Palm down circle at knee-height jackal. Palm flat, slicing away from the body, skip the north rim. 2 fingers drumming on forearm ants moving eggs. Check the seep. Thumb dragging across the lower lip, wind turning gritty by noon. This is your news service. No panic, no poetry, unless someone needs a smile. The day's big choice arrives quiet. The scouts found a shorter path with a sting open ground with snare sign and a fresh cat trace, or a longer line that threads shaded rock with honest wind. You take a vote with looks not words. Water math and feet math agree long cool alive beats short hot dramatic. Historians still argue whether this kind of consensual steering was typical of bands like yours, or whether charismatic hotheads often got their way. Your people favor the democracy of ankles. Tomorrow prefers boring. As the light tilts, the lead scout places a tiny cairn on a low slab. 3 stones triangle your library notice. The cache nearby holds 1 sealed eggshell, a small promise to your future selves. You do the respectful housekeeping brush prints, pat the lid, hide the shine with a veil of dust. Joke 3 because you've earned it. Shh, the library is open. Please keep your sips to a whisper. The smile that travels the line is slow and inexpensive. Night leans in again, and the cool returns like a friend who never asks for rent. You pack the reed straw brush thorns from sandals, feel the spider silk packet, and the bone splinters settle into their pockets. Check the sip stick notches, and let the scouts take the horizon once more. Guides scouts' quiet feet. You don't need the words. You move as if the ground were listening and the stars were writing you a map. They are. And you are. You keep the slow ones in the center of the moving circle, elders and children, and you treat that circle like a heartbeat. You can hear if you lay your cheek against the day. The elders' feet don't like arguments anymore. The children's feet love them too much. Your job is to make both pairs arrive together. You set the pace with a metronome made of kindness, walk 2 songs, rest 1 shade. Wedding sip at the eggshell scratch not before. Questions anytime jokes rationed like honey. The band breathes easier when the middle is calm. You teach by letting small hands do big work. A child ties the keeper cord on a gourd plug so a drop can't escape and become a tragedy with good lighting. Another pinches charcoal to dust and packs it into the reed straw filter fingers, black grin bright. A third pairs a damp strip to a wrist and learns how the blood carries cool like a river pretending to be small. They practice the cue at a pretend seep forked stick, planted lips wetting. Only insult the water with a smile so pride doesn't stampede. They love rules if the rules feel like games and you stage the curriculum with a straight face. Today's lesson, tiny sips, polite shade, and not getting eaten. Joke 1 purchases attention with cheap currency. The elders earn their place with maps you can't see until they sing them. Grandma sits under dune and duvet, pinching ash to quiet a hot elbow, and she recites the star road that lines up after the moon fattens, and before the wind smells like pepper. She taps her walking stick where the scratch marks of your shadow gnomon live, and shows how noon slipped a hair these last days, proof that the season is moving, even if the sky sulks. Mainstream fact in many forager societies, elders are walking archives, keepers of roots, seasons, taboos, and their memory is infrastructure. You can't build with poles and hide. Historians still argue whether unusually long, post-reproductive lifespans in humans, the grandmother hypothesis evolved because grandmothers kept grandchildren alive with food and knowledge, or whether long life is a byproduct of other gains. You don't need the vote counted to feel the truth your day stretches farther when an old voice says, "Hear this way, wait." You fold memory into things you can touch. The children string 3 ugly beads on a grass cord, 1 for morning, 1 for noon, 1 for night. They move a bead when a sipstick notch is used, so the ledger lives around a wrist where thirst can see it. They scratch a symbol you all agree on a little hooked line, like Auntie's acacia, on the inside of a shell cradle, so the right flask finds the right plug. Quirky tidbit you got from a visitor who came shimmering out of the flats. Some bands teach directions by drawing in sand while they talk fingers, making rivers and hills that last until the next gust. Sand stories, she called them, and the children now beg for them at dusk, the way they beg for honey. When the wind erases the map, the real map stays in the hand. You train bodies to notice. Every morning, a different child gets nose duty. They lick a fingertip, hold it up, and name the wind with a seriousness that would make a cloud behave if clouds believed in shame. Another child gets ear duty. They lie with a cheek on the ground and report whether the earth hums cool near the ledge where your wick cords drink. A third gets eye duty. They read the ants, whether they walk like businessmen or like tourists. You thank them with a solemn nod and a sliver of roasted root. You make data collection taste like dessert. Not all lessons are shared like songs. Some arrive as jokes that turn into laws. When a teenager tries to swagger at Hippo's Bar and Grill, you give them a job title so long it trips them assistant deputy night ladler. It's funny until they realize the ladle on a leash keeps their chest high and their face far from the water's gossiping skin. They learn to count shells with the sip stick and to keep their shadow out of the pool. They also learn that courage isn't a pose, it's a schedule. You split the carrying so nobody becomes the pack animal of fate. Elders cradle the eggshells close to their bellies, where the sway is slow. Youths take the slung gourds high across ribs, where the bounce won't turn sips into stories. Little ones carry air-empty shell cradles to feel important without falling under a task they can't lift. Mainstream fact braided into the line, humans share childcare like champions. Anthropologists call it alloparenting, and in many groups, babies spend half their day in arms that didn't birth them. Historians still argue whether this cooperative breeding came first, because drought demanded many carriers, or whether the habit predates the worst of the dry years and simply made drought survivable. Your band shrugs and passes a drowsy toddler from one set of dusty hands to another, and the shrug looks exactly like culture. At night, you test the apprentices with a calm little pageant. Show me the road to Cafe Charcoal without waking the elders. They whisper the sky cues 3 bright points leaning toward the notch. The scorpion's hook trace the dark ribbon of elephant path, touch the cairn with the triangle stone, and stop with a satisfied breath at the exact sand hollow where yesterday you set a stingy treasure one sealed shell. They don't unseal it. They only point and recite the rule future us is a real person. A bead slides on a cord. A smile slides across your face and doesn't spill a drop. You keep the elder's wisdom tidy with maintenance you can hold. An old man's fingers tremble too much for stone boiling, so you hand him the drip teacher bone sliver and let him tie it where the Wix bead needs coaching. His hands steady in small motions that feel like prayer. Grandma checks the clay slip lining the palm bowl with a glance you trust more than your own. She smears a whisper of ash in a hairline crack and hums as if the bowl is a child falling asleep. You see how authority can be light enough to carry. Family grows wider than blood under a drought's glare. The visitor with the sand stories lends you a song about a hill that looks like a sleeping porcupine. You trade a recipe for ash-tamed root in return. Beads change wrists. A small child from another band spends an afternoon in your shade, learning the cue game with forked sticks and insults. Later, your favorite teenager sits in their shade memorizing a sky joke. The network thickens invisibly like a net you hope never to test, but always hold. You do graduation in whispers. When a child leads the line through dusk to Auntie's acacia without stepping in anyone's dust or anyone's temper, you press a single bead shell into their palm and a responsibility into their shoulder. Tomorrow you carry a shell on the inside of the circle. They glow like they swallowed a warm ember. Joke 2 awarded like a diploma. Welcome to management. Your benefits include longer naps and better jokes. Memory is fed on repetitions that never turn scolding. Every evening, the elders tell again the story of the first drought. They remember the one where the elephant road turned left for a year and the rock cistern sweated at dawn, and you waited tastelessly patient until future you arrived and thanked you with a sealed shell. Mainstream fact. You tuck into the tale without making it sound like a lecture. Oral tradition remembers landscapes for centuries. In some places, songlines place names. taboo lists, and those stories steer feet as precisely as any carved signpost. Historians still argue whether strong language or dense social ties matter more for keeping knowledge intact. Your camp sings together, strings beads together, and splits honey together. Your vote is yes. The third joke comes easy, a lullaby disguised as sass. Today's pop quiz is canceled due to heat. Extra credit for anyone who can recite the Don't Get Eaten section without yawning. The yawn that rolls through the shelter is contagious and perfect. You tuck the shells to sleep, pat Dune and Duvet's doorpost, set the sipstick by the elder's hands, and lie down among the little snores and the long, even breaths of people who trust you. Children, elders, and memory make a braid that even drought teeth can't bite through easily. You thread that braid through every task shade sips silence, and it holds the day together, even when the sky plays hard to get. Tomorrow, the braid will walk again. Tonight, it lies in the cool, humming the names of caches like a to-do list that dreams on your behalf. The first drop hits like a fingertip, tapping your shoulder, polite, almost shy, and every nerve in your skin stands up to listen. Another follows darker on the dust, then a scatter like someone walking carefully across drumskin. The smell rises at once, that old beloved perfume we named back in Section 2, petrichor geosmin soils quiet singing, and your shoulders release a year you didn't know you were carrying. You don't shout, you don't stamp, you lift your palms and let the sky finish its sentence. A rule you rehearsed it through dry months clicks into place. The first rain is a test, not a feast. You walk, not run, to the tinajas you cleaned and lidded under the rock lip. The lids wear a thin, wet shine. You tip water off the tops so dust doesn't make soup. The little clay collar at the seep behaves. Your careful lip turns the trickle into a thread that doesn't claw its channel wider. You set a shell beneath, then step back and let patience keep doing its quiet, excellent job. At Cafe Charcoal, the cue marker stands again, but it's a happy prop now, an old friend in a new play. You insult the water out of habit. Very watery today will survive somehow, and the camp laughs because it feels safe to spend a laugh. Joke 1 lands gently like rain on hide. The world begins its soft applause. A chorus of frogs starts up from dust you would have sworn was sterile. Termites topple their roof hatches and send winged elates into the thickened air, their bodies a tiny seasonal feast that barely dents your water budget. Quirky tidbit with a grin, you hold a bowl under the nearest lamping ember, and it fills with sky shrimp, and the children chant protein weather like they invented meteorology. You roast a panful nutty and clean and pass them around while the smell of wet stone keeps making eyes shine. Mainstream fact to prop beside the fire: in many dry lands, winged termites erupt after the first rains, and people welcome them like a calendar you can eat. The animals rewrite the map in hours. Sand grouse lines get bold. Zebra learn to linger. Elephants arrive with their shoulders wet and their mood so good they don't even side-eye you. The hippos at Hippo's Bar and Grill clap their heavy mouths and make editorial comments. You bow with absurd courtesy and promise not to book a table. The old trunk-dug wells relax into puddles, then ponds with delicate rims. Your dew nets go slack. They've earned the nap, and your wick cords retire for a week. They're not smelling of clean water and good decisions. Work changes shape, but not soul. You move from coaxing to catching, from rationing to storing. Ash and charcoal stay in service. You still boil doubtful sips and drip them through the cone because first rains can scrub roofs and rocks and carry the gossip of a long dry season straight into your mouth. You set the wind cabinet to cool joyfully full gourds, while Dune and Duvet becomes a laundry line that dries at last because the sun is playing partner instead of prosecutor. You reseat plugs and eggshells and mark new calibration scratches, refill lines for a season that lets you be generous without being foolish. You rebuild, not because you forgot how to endure, but because repair is how you say thanks. You lift the small stone lids from rock holes and scrub the rims with grass, so no drowned insects sour your good news. You check the little Nama basins and pack their hairline cracks with fresh clay. Slip the way Grandma taught you, so tonight's storm won't vanish into yesterday's fractures. You raise a short fence of brush around the best pan, not to hoard it, but to keep cattle hooves from turning it to soup before it settles. You place the cue marker where all eyes can see it, even though tempers don't need it today. The rule stays because the memory does. You also take inventory of lessons. You pull the sip stick from your belt and run a thumb across the notches, remembering every wetting swallow that kept someone thinking when panic wanted to be loud. You oil the reed straw slide a clean grass plug through its throat and stash it again. Even in mercy tools deserve respect. You unlash the ugly drink tokens and let the children trade them for 3 ridiculous compliments each. You walked like wind. You laughed like shade. You were the finest assistant regional manager of thirst a band ever had. Joke 2 buys a little necessary silliness. History steps into your circle with muddy feet. You tell the children about the times when this land forgot itself and went green for centuries, the green Sahara, the African humid period. When lakes grew wide and people carved swimmers on rock walls, as if water were a neighbor that always dropped by at dusk. Mainstream fact across North Africa. Holocene rock art shows herds fishing even swimmers in places that today are sand. Lake beds and ancient shorelines prove the monsoon wandered north and made savanna out of desert for long stretches. Historians still argue whether the end of those long wet centuries nudged people toward herding and new migrations, or whether novel ideas were already on the road and climate merely held the door. Either way, cycles write the big rhythm. Craft writes the melody you live by. When the storm truly arrives, none of this polite tapping, but a full-throated drumming. You run the rain plan you rehearsed like a ritual. Gourds get staged under eaves. Clean leaves roof them to keep grit out. A clay-lined trench leads excess away from dune and duvet, so you don't wake up in a puddle. The little raised bed you scraped for sleeping smiles like it remembers why it exists. You carry a shell to the rock cistern and watch clean sheets run down the cliff face, choosing the catch lip you sculpted last moon. You do not cup with bare hands. You use the eggshell as your only greedy spoon. After the sky opens to a gray so soft, you want to lie down on it. You do a different kind of math. Caches refilled check. New cairns for future you along the now kind river fork check. Path repairs where the rain bit a little too hard. Check. You mark the places where the sand will flood when the real torrent comes, the way the old fire scars on trees tell you how high water likes to brag. You teach the children to read flow lines in the fresh mud, how rills braid, how silt fans, how you can tuck a seed or a tuber cutting at the edge where the damp will linger. Your menu smiles roots and bulbs fatten faster, nuts promise heavier shells. The honey guide gets busy writing invitations you're happy to accept. That night, you let the band get noisy, still smart, not foolish, but noisy with relief. You still ration heroics, not laughter. You still point at the cue stick, because the new mercy needs the old structure. You still pat the doorpost of dune and duvet out of habit, because good rooms deserve good manners. You let the elders have the center of the circle, and the children take the front row. You honor the drought by not forgetting it in the first hour of kindness. Later, under stars rinsed clean, you fold the story you've carried for 15 sections into a single promise you will keep the craft even when the sky is easy. You will keep the beads moving, the caches honest. The charcoal cone refreshed the ash, measured the crocodile dung sunscreen, permanently retired from the runway fashion, never looked so relieved. Joke 3 sighs across the camp and turns into a yawn that starts a chain of sleep. When the rains return, you do not become a different kind of human. You become the same kind with a little more ease. The drought taught you to stretch a drop. The rain teaches you to store a river. Both demand patience dressed as practice. You bow to both, then roll onto your mat and let your body believe the tapping on hide is a lullaby written for you. Now slow everything down, the way heavy raindrops soften when they finally fall through cool air. The fan of night moves gently over your face, and the breathing of the people you love evens into a tide that comes and goes without asking your permission. Let the edges blur. Let the last bright thoughts fade into the quiet gray at the center of your chest. You are dry, then damp, then softly, safely cool. Picture a single bead rolling along a grass cord, click coming to rest at the hollow of your throat. That bead is a promise kept. Picture the eggshell flasks tucked under a flat stone, bellies full plugs, seated patient as moons. Picture the thorn and hide shelter, breathing the roof, lifting and settling like the ribs of a sleeping animal. Everything that needed doing has been done, and the things that can wait are waiting happily without your supervision. Far away, Auntie's acacia lifts its arms and lets rain comb the dust from every leaf. The elephant road is no longer a question mark. It's a soft ribbon that glows under starlight and disappears under puddles. Hippo's Bar and Grill mutters to itself, but you're already smiling. Cafe Charcoal is closed for the night. The cue stick is a harmless toy in the hands of a drowsy child, tracing lines in damp sand. The honey guide has tucked its head under its wing. Even the wick cords sleep. Your breath becomes the only map you need, in slow and generous, out slower still, like water seeping into clean earth. If a stray worry lifts its head, give it a tiny job hold. The corner of a leaf, keep one bead from rolling off the cord, and watch it settle proud and useless into rest. Listen for the last soft sound, not thunder, not wind, just the quiet applause of drops on hide, of sleep walking towards you with open hands. Let your jaw loosen your shoulders, sigh, your hands uncurl. The night is working on your behalf. You can let go.